As for the late start, we're just having some IT issues, so we're going to rejigger our order of operations a little bit. Appreciate everybody showing up tonight, a couple nights after the snowstorm. Okay, so call the meeting to order. We're going to table the minutes for now, and like I said, we're going to change the order a little bit, but I wanted to ask if there is public comment at this point for something that is not on our agenda. Does anybody have anything they're here to talk about that's not on the agenda? Okay. Great. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to jump to the public hearings before we do the tree cuttings, and I apologize for the folks who are here for the tree cuttings, but we can't get the projector to work just yet. So we're trying to reboot that, and we're hoping that because that's more visual, that we'll have time to get that working so folks can see what we're talking about. So yeah, let's get started on the zoning amendments. I know a lot of you are here. Of course, there's been a great deal of interest in the topic of ADUs, accessory dwelling units. It's something that this board has considered a lot, along with the invaluable help of the Housing Commission. And for my part, I would just say to the board before we actually turn it over to the public to gain comments, I've talked to a lot of folks who are concerned about the proposal to have 2 ADUs per property. And so I wanted to float the idea for the board of rolling that back to 1 ADU per property. I know that that may not be something that everyone agrees with, but I think it's something that the board should discuss. So if folks are willing, I would like to hear people's opinions. Oh, yeah, sorry.
So you want me to give that overview?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry, I got 2 out of order. I guess we do cluster first. All right, so we'll jump into that. Sorry.
All right, so I'm sorry that we don't have I believe the internet is out, and so when the projection is based on a Bluetooth connection, it won't actually project. So as soon as the internet comes back on, hopefully we have that capability. In the meantime, there are hard copies of things on the stage if you want something to look along at. So the First Amendment on the list of potential amendments to go through, and just so maybe it makes sense since it could be the first time some of you have attended a zoning amendment public hearing. So this is the first of what can potentially be 2 hearings for zoning amendments, and this is the last opportunity really for the planning board to make a change to what gets proposed. If there's a substantive change made tonight, then they continue that item to the 23rd of this month for the second public hearing, at which time then they would make a decision on that particular item as to whether or not that moved forward to town meeting when it's voted on by ballot. So if there's not a substantive change made to an item tonight, then the board would decide whether or not to move forward the amendment to town meeting this evening. So to start off here, the first amendment that the board has been working on, it has to do with the clustered development regulation. So a clustered development that you would be familiar with would be like the Snowcrest subdivision or Great Pines. So Snowcrest is West Side Drive on Route 11, just on the other side of the interstate. And these subdivisions are, they have some different land requirements for what each individual house is built on, but overall, there's no additional density allowed for the development. There's common area that is reserved for each one of the houses. So if it's a 2-acre requirement for each house in that zone, and you're building a house on a 1/2 acre, there has to be 1.5 acres of land set aside in common area to make up that difference between the 1/2 acre and the 2-acre. So just so you're aware of sort of what a cluster subdivision is. There's no additional units allowed to be built in a cluster development, but it's designed in a different manner. So what's being proposed by the planning board is to eliminate a requirement that has been in the zoning ordinance for some time that doesn't allow cluster subdivisions on a tract of land any less than 5 acres. And so this doesn't allow for, say, in R1, where the lot size is 10,000 square feet or about 1/4 acre, it doesn't allow for a small cluster subdivision, say of 3 units or 4 units. You would have to get a minimum of 5 acres, which would obviously be a fairly significant development size. So the intent here, that the planning board was working on this, is to potentially allow for some small infill development to exist. There's no additional density that's allowed, so it doesn't change the number of units, but it allows for potentially some small developments to occur. In tandem with this, there's a proposal as part of it to reduce the perimeter setback from 100 feet to 50 feet. And this is because a 100-foot perimeter setback on a small lot is a lot of land. Obviously, on a 5-acre lot, that is not as significant. But if you were talking a 2-acre parcel that's going to be developed 100 feet could be a significant rim and is far greater than any setback of a traditional single family on its own lot development. So those are the 2 portions within the cluster. So then the board will discuss if they have anything off the bat that they wanted to change, and then Tim will open it to public hearing. So you can ask the board if they have anything.
Yeah, no, it's all right. So is there anything from the board on this? I jumped ahead, I apologize, I might lot in my head. Anything on clusters that the board would like to discuss? Okay. Are there questions or comments from the public on clusters? So if you can come forward to the mic and just state your name and make sure can't see from here if the mic is on. Okay, just hit the button if you would so it turns green.
The little button in the middle, Peter.
There you go. Thank you.
My name's Peter Stanley. I live on Burpee Hill. New London has had for up until 2012, when I was last involved with zoning locally. New London had the 4th highest population density in the region, behind Hanover, Lebanon, and Claremont. We are able to accommodate that kind of density without it being obvious to everyone who drives up and down the streets in New London and so forth, because of the fact that we have things like the 100-foot buffer requirement in the cluster zoning. And reducing that, well, let me give you a couple examples. You mentioned 2. A third would be Fenwood. It's virtually impossible to see the houses in Fenwood from the highway because of the 100-foot buffer. Similarly, Great Pines. Yes, when you get to the road, you get the gap, you can look in, you can see 1 or 2 houses in there. Same with West Side Drive, the snow development over there. But basically, these places are invisible for all practical purposes because of the 100-foot buffer. A 50-foot buffer becomes more see-through without adding an awful lot of vegetation. Usually ends up not being natural vegetation. And therefore, I think you'd be throwing the baby out with the bathwater here by simply reducing it overall to 50 feet. You would be better advised to keep it 100 feet with an exception in certain zone districts where there is not enough room or it's expected that things would be more visible. But we should be trying based on the master plan to protect the visual qualities of New London, and that would largely dictate that we make some effort to hide the large-scale development that is able to be accomplished right now anywhere in town. And therefore, reducing this buffer is the wrong way to go. You might want to have a graded buffer or something of that nature depending on where you're doing this, but to change this buffer strip is a huge mistake in my mind because it's exactly the opposite of what the goal of the master plan is, to keep New London looking as attractive as it has. So I would hope that you would rethink this. Thank you.
Peter, can I ask you a question before you go?
Yes.
I see your point too. Do you think obviously between R2 and R1, there's a fairly big jump there from a 2-acre lot to a 10,000 square foot lot. Do you think exclusively treating R1 different in that sense would make sense.
That may make some sense. That's an approach. I would, of course, need to read it to know, but it certainly doesn't make sense in ARR or R2 for that matter. I think part of Fenwood is in R2. All of the Great Pines subdivision, I think, is in R2 as well. But Harry Snow's development out on Davis Hill is all ARR. And you literally don't know it's there. And that's one of the beauties of New London. It keeps property values high, hence we get reasonable tax revenue from our properties in New London. And everyone is fooled into thinking that it's a rural place, when in fact it's not. It's quite the opposite. Like I said, fourth highest population density in the Upper Valley region. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Bob Lyon. I'm a resident of New London. I agree wholeheartedly with Peter. Thank you for that presentation. That was, I think, spot on. Just a little background, if you can help me out here. So the current size is 5 acres. What is the actual proposal to reduce it to what size? Are you just going to eliminate it and say you could put it on a 5,000 square foot lot so the whole zoning is gone, or what is the proposal?
So zoning still stands. They would eliminate a minimum development lot size for the cluster section of the ordinance, but that doesn't actually change the lot size of individual lots. So the way that this is written, you can't pursue a cluster development unless the developer has 5 acres to then break up into small lots. So this would eliminate that threshold. However, it does not actually change the size of individual lots. That's a separate issue
So,
that there's no proposal for.
thank you. What is you mentioned the density. What is the density requirement right now? Like if you had a 5 acre lot, how many units could you put? Ground level, second level, third level, fourth level? I don't know. I have no background
Sure.
on that
Yep.
whatsoever.
So it's different in every zone. And so this, just for future, might be handy, but in the very last page of the zoning ordinance, there's a quick reference guide that it walks through all of that. But for example, in this particular section, it's allowed in the conservation, the ARR, R1 and R2, I believe. Yes. And so that ranges from 10,000 square foot lot in the R1 zone, 2 acres in the R2, 4 acres in the ARR, and then 10 acres in the conservation zone. And so the density then that is allowable is based on that individual zone. So if you have a 5 acre parcel in the R2, you're only going to get 2 units out of that because each unit has to account for 2 acres. So if you had a 6 acre, obviously you could get 3 units there.
So what is the maximum number of units you could get based on your zoning mapping?
Depends on the size of the land of the lot.
5 acres. What's the maximum number of dwelling units you could put on 5 acres?
Well, if you had 5 acres in the AR or the R1, it's roughly 4 units per acre because it's 10,000 square
so
feet.
we're
Obviously, an
talking
acre is
small numbers.
43,000. So by the time you get to your 5th acre, you can probably squeeze out an extra house. But there's not many 5 acre lots left in R1.
Okay.
So I think that unless a developer were to, not to say there's not any, there are not many. And so a developer would have to probably accumulate several.
And these are freestanding units. This isn't a condo or a townhome development. They have their own special requirements?
Correct.
Got it.
Yep. So they're individual single-family homes on lots that are of a reduced size in lieu of common area being designated.
Got it. So we're not talking here anything about condos or townhomes, that kind of thing, like a Twin Pines kind of a thing.
So Twin Pines is not a condo or a townhome. They're a multifamily.
Apartments, right.
So condo or a townhome would be a planned unit development, which would be like the Hilltop or the back section of Fenwood where they're in the adjoined building. That's a planned unit development.
Okay. So we're not talking about that at all. This has nothing to do with this zoning change.
Not with this one.
Not with this one.
Stay tuned.
Comes up again later.
Yep.
Thank you. My last question is, it does sound like it's small numbers. We're not going to see like 150, 200 new homes being built, but there is a lot of concern in town about our water supply. So why would anybody want to vote for a zoning change that, I mean, I can argue it that way, right? Why would anybody want to vote for that? Knowing we have this impending water issue, why would we even think that, to do that? And I'm not trying to make an argument, that's one way to approach it. So I'm wondering what your comeback to that would be. We are thinking about this because of...
Sure. So this doesn't change the allowable density. So you're not going to net any additional homes from what that size. The advantage to the developer is that they can develop on a smaller footprint, which is obviously more affordable. The advantage to the general public is the preservation of the common area land that is left untouched, hopefully.
But it sounds like, since we don't have many 5-acre parcels left, so I understand, if
In
you
R1.
reduce the requirement on that, that means developers can come in and put in homes before where they couldn't.
In the cluster style, but that doesn't mean that a individual could not buy just the size lot that they needed for their individual home.
I'm just trying to get a sense of what this is going to do. It sounds like when you make that zoning change, you go from 5 acres to basically no acres or just a small amount of land. That's going to make it very appealing to developers, I think that's the case, to come in and put up more housing. So it could have a long-term impact on water. But why are we interested in making this change? Why are we wanting to put more houses up? I understand there's this national housing crisis, but I'm not sure that the town of New London has to solve that. So from your perspective, I'm really asking a question. What is,
and I guess it should be from the board's
yeah,
perspective.
what's the philosophy behind that? What's the rationale as to why we should vote for this and have more houses built? For what reason? Are these for caretakers? Are these for out-of-town people? Are these for vacation homes? Are these for workers at the hospital in Colby Sawyer? I mean, I've heard all kinds of different rationales, but I haven't heard from this board what the rationale is. So that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at it, but I'd like others on the board to jump in as well, if you'd like. So our philosophy is that there is a housing crisis nationally, of course, as you pointed to, but also locally. If you talk to the folks running the college, running the hospital, other businesses in town, there's a massive crisis when it comes to affordability in order to actually attract workers to the town. So I think it's pretty clear, even when we've done surveys, that folks are really concerned about housing as well. And as far as the water, I think you're right. We do have to be smart about water use, but I also think that when we look at where some of the development has happened in recent years in town, it hasn't all been within the water precinct. It's just been, with people who are in private wells. Mm-hmm. And I also think, just this is my opinion, but that we can't sort of hamstring the growth of the town because of water. We're not Arizona. This isn't a place where we have absolutely no water, and it's bananas to continue to build in places like that where the climate is changing to such a degree that it's going to be difficult to live in the future. We have challenges around water for sure, but I don't think that this is the kind of thing where we have to halt all development in town, which would be bad for the town.
So thank you for saying that. I think what I just heard, and tell me if I'm incorrect, we're really doing this, the planning board is saying, we're doing this because we need workforce housing. You just mentioned Colby Sawyer, the hospital, business in town, they're in a crisis, we have to get more houses up. Why are we putting up Twin Pines? That's 60 units of low-income housing for workers. It's called workforce housing. So why should I vote for this when I know we have Twin Pines coming in? Why would anybody even think of that?
Well, I think from everyone we've spoken to, that Twin Pines will help the situation, but will not fix the situation. This is not a one and done, and it's not the only type of housing that we need is not just workforce housing. We need we've talked before about needing a diversity of housing, and there was an anecdote from, I think from Tom Mannion, or someone came from the hospital, talked about, they had a physician that they were trying to relocate to New London who couldn't come here because he couldn't find housing. So it's at all levels, and that housing is a challenge. And so our thought is to be smart about it, but to try to do things that we can do to increase housing.
Yeah, it was just interesting that your first comeback when I pushed the board to say, why are you doing that? The first answer was workforce housing. So my suggestion would be, if you're trying to sell this to taxpayers like myself, don't pitch it that way, because as soon as you say workforce housing, I say, why am I supporting Twin Pines? Doesn't make any sense.
Well, Twin Pines actually would contribute to the town from a tax perspective.
Yeah, I understand, but it's also providing 60 units of housing.
That's correct.
So, I mean, it's going to be, is it workforce housing? Is it caretakers, for mom and pop, for the kids. I think it's all of the above. That's your diversity of housing. But I've asked this question twice now, and I've gotten the same answer. Well, we need it for Colby Sawyer. I need it for the hospital. This doctor couldn't find it. Well, that sounds like workforce housing. And we're doing that
It's
with
also
Twin
just
Pines.
housing, period, full stop. It's housing, which
But that's not the way you responded to the question. You responded
giving
with
examples.
workforce housing. So
it's a
that's my
diversity of
point.
housing, so I apologize if I focus too much on workforce housing, but we need a diversity of housing in town. That's our understanding, and so therefore, we're trying to do things we can to facilitate.
And I think that's why we're going to vote on that. So thank you very much. It's been very helpful. I appreciate the
Yeah, I
background.
think Jeremy would like to jump in.
Actually, I'd like to respond to you for a second.
Sure.
In 2019, we completed a master plan survey. And one thing that I've noticed is that when there is opposition to these, it's pointed out that why is the board doing this? The board represents the town. Part of that master plan process resulted in 93% of the survey respondents identifying in attracting a balanced mix of residents' age groups as important or very important to the future of New London. That's the residents. The planning board represents the town. That is what the residents responded. 77% responded that expanding rental opportunities for members of the workforce is important or very important. 63% favored exploring the provisions of detached accessory dwelling units as important or very important. The board that's sitting here is not pulling things out of the air. We're responding to a long process that included the town.
And I get that, and I think that's good perspective. But if I did a survey right now and have people raise their hands, who would like to see lower taxes? Raise your hand. I bet it's 100% of the people in this room. Just because you get 93% on a survey, it doesn't mean that much in terms of what the board is going to recommend doing. It has to be taken into the whole context of what's going on in the town. That's my point. So I appreciate that data, but thank you very much. It's been helpful. Thank you very much. I don't know how I would vote on this. I'm a little skeptical right now because of Twin Pines. I think that's going to make a huge dent in terms of workforce housing. I don't know why we have to change zoning, but thank you.
Yep. Paul, did you want to say something as well?
Peter, in response to this whole discussion, I'm a little concerned because I think it's gotten off point. This attempt at what we're doing here does not increase density at all. What it does, what the change would do is say on the smaller lots, say you have an acre lot and you could build 4 units on that acre. You can now place them in a more attractive way because you don't have to have each one of them 100 feet from the front. That's all it does. And as Tim said and as Adam said, the benefit is not more units. It actually may be a more attractive cluster of units with the access that's not needed for each unit that's clustered being perpetual open space. So your comments and the comments of the other person are very relevant to some of the other provisions, but I think we're getting offline with the cluster. It really just allows you to take the units that you're allowed to build and put them in a better formation.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Are there other comments from the board before I go back to the public?
I'll wait till we get further in the discussion.
Okay. Are there other comments from the public on clusters?
Hello.
Yeah.
Matt Barras, I live on Davis Hill. I'm trying to think of how this would have an effect on a place like Davis Hill where there's 4 vacant lots, roughly 7 or 8 acres per lot. Could they put 4 of these on one on each of these lots and maybe have 4 of these developments in one area like that? And how would that not affect density, you know?
Potentially. I mean, if there's an 8-acre lot, 4 acres are required for units in yours.
Yep.
So in theory, that 8-acre lot could likely be subdivided into 2 units and
Right.
each build an independent, single-family home.
So somebody could take, say, 20 acres, break it up into 4 or 5 acres, and put development, 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 if they wanted.
Correct, but they could take that 20 acres and divide it into 4-acre lots to start with. So that the
And
net.
then even have more, and it would, no?
No, there's no additional units allowed. So if you have 20 acres in a 4-acre zone, you get 5 units, whether it's clustered all together or whether it's 5 units on individual 4-acre lots.
But each one of the acres as they sit now, each one of those parcels could house a development.
Just as it could today
Correct.
and be divided into 4 individual.
Being an ARR, how many homes could you put in, say, a 5-acre lot on an ARR?
On a 5-acre lot, you would
Yeah.
only get one.
One,
And
okay.
so with a 20-acre lot example in ARR, this would actually not
Yep.
change anything because it already exceeds the 5-acre minimum. And so that would be allowed to be developed in a cluster today without any changes. So this would actually not impact that
Okay.
example.
All right,
Same with an 8-acre lot.
all right, thank you.
Yep.
I think one thing to think about with the cluster subdivision is it's not changing density at all. The cluster subdivision as it stands right now, there's a 100-foot buffer that wraps around the property, separating it from adjacent properties or the street, to Peter's point. The proposal is to change it to 50. So what that's doing is allowing a greater area central to the lot for development and then reducing that 100-foot buffer down to 50. So that 50-foot buffer, depending on what zoning district you're in, may or may not be larger than the side lot setbacks or rear lot setbacks that exist. I don't remember all of the setbacks off the top of my head. But it does change the setbacks and would bring it from that 100 to 50. So I don't know if that's maybe helpful in a way to think about this, is that, you can think of that one lot having all of the houses in the center. Current zoning says it's a 100-foot buffer all around them. The proposal is to bring that 100-foot to 50-foot.
May I speak? And you actually may have a much more pleasant, calm, inviting environment with a 50-foot setback and the houses not clustered quite so closely together. It could be much more idyllic, could be, very, very attractive. So, as Adam has said, it doesn't increase the density, it allows spreading out of some of those cluster homes.
So I do just want to clarify, though, that this is the perimeter setback, not the internal setbacks. So with cluster subdivisions, setbacks work entirely different than they do on your individual single-family lot. And the setbacks are internal building to building lot versus lot line to building. So this is slightly different, that we're not proposing a change from how the internal configuration of a development would be.
So we heard from Peter a proposal to amend this in some way. I know, did you want to talk about that for a minute, Jeremy? Did you?
I might have to lean back on Peter. I think Peter was suggesting that each of the zones have like a staggered or a different buffer. Or he might have been saying that different portions of the property, such as street side, have a different buffer. My thought is using Twin Pines, Great Pines as an example. The street buffer is what hides, for lack of a better term, the development through 100 feet of trees. So I don't know if you're proposing it different between zones or different between, say, street side and perimeter side.
I was referring to all the way around the perimeter setback. 100 feet is working well and has worked well for many years. If it isn't broke, don't fix it. And there's little to be gained by doing so, except perhaps, as Adam has pointed out, in the R1 district, which is considerably different lot size and density than elsewhere. Perhaps in the R1 district, you apply this particular 50-foot standard and leave R2 and ARR as they are.
So let me just summarize that into what it would actually read in the here, just to respond to. So no structure in the conservation zone, agricultural, rural residential, or residential R2 shall be located closer than 100 feet to the perimeter of the tract, and no structure within the urban residential R1 shall be located closer than 50 feet to the perimeter of the tract. Is that capture? Okay.
Adam, the draft has also the R2 with water and sewer. You need to address that.
In the cluster section, Paul? Or, no, I think you're talking about the regular setback issue. That's a separate amendment.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. So what is the frontage setback or the perimeter setback on R2 with water and sewer?
So no difference there wouldn't be a difference. This is under buffer strip and setbacks building separation. So under 7A perimeter setbacks, it would be in that section. And I wish the internet is still saying it's out. I wish I could put it up here.
No, I understand. I see where it is, but I'm saying the lot sizes are smaller.
But we're not changing the lot sizes
I know, but should it?
or the frontage.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so from other folks on the board, what are the thoughts on this?
And so then let me just also read the language for the buffer strip section of the same content, but a buffer strip having a minimum depth of 100 feet in the shall be provided in the conservation, the ARR, and the R2, and then again, then the language that in the R1, the buffer strip having a minimum of 50 feet.
Are there thoughts from the board on limiting this to R1?
Adam, excuse me. Adam, initially, when we were reviewing this, the intent is to infill on some of the remaining smaller lots that are in R1 mostly. Do we have the same issue with sort of small remaining lots in R2 and ARR, or are the majority of those still substantially larger lots?
I mean, potentially we do, but a small lot in the R2 is drastically different than a small lot in R1. I mean, we're talking a factor of 8. So, if you consider a R1 lot dimension, is like, what, 100 by 100, I guess. So, effectively, it takes at least 4 of those probably to make designing something with a 100-foot buffer, and then you're saying that the 2 in the middle you could potentially put on the houses, whereas R2, if you get into having 4 acres of land, that's a significantly larger lot that accommodating even on a smaller development of only 2 houses in an R2 cluster, the dimensions of the land are substantially larger. So it seems like it could be accommodated. I mean, correct.
Okay, so from the board, are there other thoughts on this idea?
Adam, the process for changing this brings it to the next meeting with the proposed changes?
Correct. So it would take you all agreeing on that being what you'd like to see, and then we wouldn't take action to move it forward to town meeting tonight. We would vote to continue this item to the second public hearing on the 23rd with those discussed changes.
And it's the normal process. Somebody has to make a motion, second, and we vote.
Correct.
I agree with Peter. I think there is a good point in the size of lots. So I would make a motion to change it to the language that, Adam, you read prior, that hopefully I don't have to repeat.
So there's motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
And I should have mentioned that Janet is voting for Bill Helm tonight, and Emily, you can vote for Paul, if that works. Thank you. Okay.
All right, next. Okay, so this is where the proposed planned unit development changes are. So as mentioned before, planned unit developments are what you would traditionally think of as a condominium. One thing to remember is that that does not necessarily mean only a residential condominium. We have some commercial condominiums like the Gallery, for example. So it is a little bit different in that we don't have cluster commercial properties. Though on the surface, this amendment looks similar to the last one, the rationale behind it is slightly different. So the first component is also to eliminate the minimum of the 5 acres. And though I think the intent that the board had was also to allow for some small infill development. For example, the old hospital condominiums or the Barton condominiums that are on Main Street that were conversions of historic structures into these small condo buildings are both on lots that are an acre or less, and they serve a really sort of niche part of the real estate market where they are really modest size market rate condominiums. However, there's an interesting component to this, which we actually had to play out a few years ago with the planning board when Bar Harbor Bank wished to subdivide out the interest of the carriage house. This is the Bar Harbor on Newport Road, and convert it to a planned unit development and sell that second structure to an independent owner. And so that's only a 2.25 acre lot, I think, just over that. But we didn't have a choice but to approve it, even though it was less than 5 acres, because of a case in the 80s where there was a property, I think it was in somewhere in the Conway area, but where they wanted to convert one of the old sort of motel cottage colony tourist developments into condominiums, and they were denied that based on the regulations that they couldn't meet. And so the court said, because nothing is changing in the built environment except for the ownership structure, that there will now be 5 deeds that each individual person owns the interest in the overall association and their individual unit, that the town must grant that subdivision to a planned unit development. So in conversations with the town council, we've talked about, so we allow multifamily at a density of 5,000 square feet per unit in the commercial. So if somebody had an acre of land, they could come and build 8 units of rental housing. They would never even actually have to occupy that rental housing, and they could come back to us and force us to allow that to be converted to a condominium, even though they have less than 5 acres, because nothing is changing other than the ownership structure, and the built environment, the number of units, and their style would be allowed there anyways. And so their advice is that because there's sort of this backdoor roundabout way of getting there anyways, that we shouldn't have something that now stands in the way. It's likely that when this was written, it was before that case, and so that's the explanation on that piece. The second parts of that same amendment are For the perimeter setbacks, it's currently at 75 feet to the perimeter, and that this would reduce it to that the setbacks would be that of what is required in the underlying zone district as a typical development. And part of that is also because that's what a multifamily structure would be held to. And so if you were to come and propose a multifamily development, you would be held to the setbacks required in that zone. And then the last component here is that there is a portion of this planned unit development section that requires connection to the New London Springfield Water Precinct for water and to the New London sewer system for sewer. And this is proposed to be eliminated. This summer, the zoning board had to grant a variance for a planned unit development project, so the continuum housing, to allow them to put in wells when they were told that there was not water available for them. And at that point, the zoning board members were advised by council that they really needed to issue the variance, and so obviously that is in question. On the sewer, sewer is slightly different in that there is state law that exists requiring the connection to sewer, bless you, if the development is within 100 feet of the existing sewer line. And so the board's feeling was that the state law takes care of that with all properties, whether it's a planned unit development, a cluster, a single family, or a commercial. I think that's the summary.
That's great. Thanks, Adam. Are there comments from the board? Okay. From the public, are there questions or comments on this? Please, Steve, come up forward and just state your name for the record. Thanks.
For the record, I'm Steve Root, live on Morgan Hill Road. I just want to point out that I'm on the zoning board, so I heard this case of continuum, and the water precinct would not provide them with water. And so the requirement that they connect to the water precinct for water really did compel a variance. We don't have that same situation with the sewer, and there is a difference between a requirement in state law that says if the sewer is 100 feet away from you, connect, and the requirement that's currently in the ordinance that says you must connect to the sewer. The difference is the sewer lines are on some Main Street lines. This has the effect of vastly increasing the potential for planned unit developments. That may be the intention, but I don't want people to misunderstand that eliminating the sewer when we're really needing to cross out the water is something we need to do and has very little effect because it has a significant effect. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Other comments or questions from the public? Yep.
I'm Jerry Coogan. I live on Quarry Road. I'd be in favor of retaining the requirement for sewer. I know the state law says within 100 feet. I think you should always hook up to a sewer system if a development is in a reasonable proximity. I think the town should require even a larger distance, maybe 200 feet or 300 feet. A developer will always make the case, oh, it's too expensive to hook up to the sewer. I can do it cheaper, but I think it's always better to hook up the public sewer when it's available. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Yep, please come forward.
Good evening. My name's Mike Fallon. We live on Main Street here in New London. And I guess I just wanted maybe some amplification on the comments made by the gentleman who's on the zoning board about exactly what door is being opened here as regards to the requirement for sewer hookup or no requirement in a PUD. I don't know if I'm asking you or you, but I think you touched on an important point, and I'd like to understand it.
Yeah, if you want to come back up, Steve, that's fine.
Okay, so currently, the ordinance says if you have a PUD, you must hook up to the sewer. Now, the PUD is a district. Unfortunately, we can't project it, but it's a substantial district drawn on as an overlay on the zoning map. In large parts of that district, it's not possible to connect to the sewer, and so currently, PUDs that are possible have to be reasonably close to where the sewer line is. And so in saying we can just rely on state law doesn't say you must hook up to the sewer. It says if you're close to the sewer, hook up. So the effect is we're now saying develop PUDs throughout the district, and if you're not close to the sewer, you don't have to hook up. That's the difference. And so it's not like state law is the same as what we have currently. And so I guess my question is, and this goes to questions that the chair of the water precinct has raised, what is the build-out impact of this proposal? Because I believe it has a build-out impact. Has the zoning board, I'm sorry, the planning board evaluated that? Do we have a number of units that could be developed?
Steve, are you asking the build-out impact on the sewer capacity, or is that
No,
what?
the build-out impact of eliminating the requirement that PUDs be connected to the sewer. Because the sewer line only runs through part of what the PUD district is. And so my point is, the current requirement has a restrictive effect on PUDs. And so we're concerned about build-out, and that's the question. Did I help you out at all? Thank you.
My attorney asked the right question.
Just real quick, Jeremy's going
Hold
to
on.
make one comment, and then,
One comment on all of the water precinct questions. Whether this is changed or not, any development needs to go to the water precinct. I mean, it's obvious that the water precinct has a concern. New London has a concern on the amount of water we have available. So whether or not it's a single-family residence that's currently allowable on a vacant lot that somebody wants to build, all development is, the water precinct has its eye on. So none of these things are sneaking around the fact that has to occur. The question about the water precinct and whether or not it's on sewer, they're kind of related, yes, because what this change is proposing is we have an overlay district, and to Stephen's point, we can't see it, that's, this big, but the sewer actually only reaches a certain portion of it. So there are areas in the overlay district that's already been established. We're not proposing changing the overlay district. We're just saying that in that overlay district, the whole district is allowable to have a planned unit development, even if it isn't, the current sewers are not reaching it, which means then they would have to have their own on-site disposal systems.
So, I'm sorry, what was your name again? Steve. I think Steve asked the question. I didn't hear an answer. What is the expected build-out? I mean, typically when you do a plan, you're making a proposal, you have some idea of what the impact would be. So I don't think I heard that number.
So Bob, we don't have a number, and I wish that I just tried to reboot this internet connection and the Bluetooth again, and it's not working. So sorry that I don't have anything better than this, but if you can see on here, the red cross-hatching is the planned unit development overlay, and then the red dots are the sewer manholes. And so the area that is not covered by the sewer connection is predominantly the area along Little Sunapee Road, where the Messer Farm and the area that Osmond Sargent protected a couple of years ago. Obviously, there are some houses in there that are not under conservation easement, but that's predominantly the area that is within the PUD and not served, with the exception of the area of the Knights Hill Nature Preserve.
can you come back up to the mic? Sorry, just so we can record it. Thank you.
So I'm trying to understand your answer. Does that mean your expectation is there wouldn't be a large impact? Is that-
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Please, yep.
Still Mike Fallon. If I think I've understood the clarification of the difference between state law as regards sewer hookup and the local ordinance here in New London, I have to say I prefer the New London ordinance staying in place because it will be a deterrent, a buffer, not an elimination, but it is a buffer. I've spent too much of my career in this business. I know exactly how much it slows down or accelerates development. And if you mete it out in a measured fashion, you can control development. If you don't, it eats you alive. I've been on both sides of that. I'm telling you, be very careful and be very incremental in what you permit. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see in this proposal you mentioned infill development. I think that's a very good planning tool. I'm just curious, how did the 5-unit development behind Pella Windows get approved? There's 5 units back there.
Those are expected to be maintained as rental property. They're not condominiums.
Was that just a
Site plan review.
site plan approval, multifamily development?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Yep.
Peter Stanley again. I hesitate to bring this up because I'm not in favor of the change in the first place, but in buffer strip, you have a 75-foot strip and no dwelling or structure or accessory structure, parking area, blah, 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 shall be located within 75 feet. And then setbacks and building separations, you've simply crossed out the 75 feet and set yourself up for the application of the stricter rules shall apply. So you're back to the 75 feet the way you've written this. I'm actually in favor of the 75-foot buffer and think it should stay that way. And the way you've written it, it stays that way. Thank you.
Are there comments from the board on that last point? In terms of just potentially just eliminating that 75?
Say that again. I'm sorry. I was reading.
Right.
What's that? Yeah.
We have to decide what it is, though. Right.
Sorry, Adam, I still can't find where the 275s are.
So number 6 and number 7.
Oh, all right, got it. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I have it now, thank you.
So why don't we start by sort of taking one by one? Does that work? So elimination of the 5-acre minimum in planned unit development. Are people on board with that?
Yep.
I think. Okay. So then handling the 2 75-foot buffers, perimeter and buffer, what are the thoughts?
This part is not as important to me, but I don't know what others think.
So just leave it as it is?
To leave, I'm saying, yeah, that it would be fine with me if we left it, but I don't think that's as material as the other parts. What do others on the board think?
Let's make sure we know what you're referring to and the audience knows. What
Yeah, on 6 and 7. That's, go ahead.
So it would just be to leave the buffer strip and perimeter setback sections as they're currently stand?
So no change there.
Right, rather than saying, no structure shall be located closer to the perimeter of the tract than the setbacks required of the underlying zoning district, you'd leave it at 75.
Correct.
Is that
Correct.
what you're
Yep.
saying?
Adam, can I confuse things? Would it be simpler to just wipe out A? Because 6 is actually more restrictive. If you just wipe out A, then we aren't going to run into this in the future where we actually have setbacks in multiple places
Right.
listed.
Right.
Yeah, it's still a change, but
think we can do that.
but I think it's a change that simplifies
Yeah, it probably does.
the ordinance.
So to eliminate the perimeter setback and just let the buffer setback of 75 feet speak to it in one place?
Correct, because the buffer strip is actually more restrictive because it lists structures and parking and et cetera. And then under perimeter setback, it isn't as restrictive, and it's 75 in both places.
Okay. So then,
So to Peter's point, it would stay 75, but we would simplify the language.
That's a fair point. Jeremy, how do folks feel about that?
I'm good with that, that's fine.
Paul?
I'm a little confused as usual.
Join the club.
I'm thinking of small lots. Hello? I'm thinking of small lots, Adam, and 75 feet on each side of the small, R1 or commercial lot doesn't leave a lot. I shouldn't have said it. It doesn't leave mucho space.
It'd be up to you to say that,
Does that work? I don't have a calculator with me to figure it out.
we haven't, trying to think of a planned unit development other than continuum that we have even had conceptual on in many years, and I don't think there has been one. And obviously the continuum parcel was significant in size, and so they were easily able to accommodate it.
75.
Sure.
I kind of feel like maybe that's something we could revisit later too, Paul.
I'm fine with that. I mean, we're going from only thinking about 5-acre lots to thinking about 10,000 square foot lots, so.
Yep. Okay, so.
Excuse me, for the
yeah.
benefit of the audience,
Yeah.
as well as the board,
Yeah,
if we were to leave in the modification that's in red, the setback structures, no structure shall be located closer to the perimeter than the underlying zoning district required, what would a 10,000, excuse me? What would a 10,000 square foot lot allow? Anything? What, in terms of a perimeter?
No, but you wouldn't get any additional units on a 10,000 square foot lot.
Right,
And if somebody had a 20,000 square foot lot
right.
and they had 2 units, they could structure it as a duplex.
Right.
So there would probably be, on a smaller development like that, there would probably be a different avenue for a developer to achieve their goal of developing 2 units.
Right. If we left it as required under the underlying zoning.
Correct. Or, no, if we left it at 75 feet, sorry.
Thank you.
thanks, Marianne.
So I just want to make sure my notes are right, that I'm getting the gist being that we eliminate 7A
Right,
and default to the same standard that already exists in 6.
in 6, yep.
Okay.
I think just in summary, to Adam's point, leaving it at 75 feet on the very small lots, there's another avenue for development. On the larger lots, the 75 feet is not as much of a hindrance. The medium-sized lots, to Tim's point, may actually be a little bit of a hindrance, but I think it's a good compromise. So I would move that we strike A, default to the 75, and keep the rest of the amendment, and bring it to the next meeting.
Thank you for that.
I just want clarity on the water sewer section, because that.
Oh, yeah, we didn't get to
breezed over
that. Yep, yep.
So was the consensus to leave the sewer connection required? Or?
I don't agree with making a change there. I think, when we looked at this, the idea was to allow the development further into the zone, into the overlay district that was already established prior. And then the sewer lines and the fact of sewer lines actually expanding any further, the likelihood of that happening being minimal. This is a way to actually increase or allow infill development throughout the already designated overlay district. So I'm not in favor of changing that.
What if others feel on the board?
I agree with Jeremy. I think, sorry. I think the section is internally inconsistent, but I agree with Jeremy that we ought to correct that.
Others? Yeah.
We've got so many things on the table here, in terms of changes, not keeping it, eliminating it, whatever. So Jeremy, you're saying,
Talking to the mic, Marianne, just so we can all hear. Yeah, just talk closer to the mic if you would. Thanks.
so you're saying that you would require the Water and Sewer Service for the New London Sewer Commission? You would
No.
require that hookup?
No.
What are you saying?
I'm saying keep the language we have, which does not require that.
In order to expand to the full already designated PUD district, which is larger, which is already a designated place, we're just saying don't require the sewer part in order to allow PUD development within the already designated PUD district.
Okay, fine.
Paul, did you have a comment?
Perhaps too drafty, but it seems like we might satisfy some of the concern here if we required them to hook up to the sewer. We dealt with the water. Hook up to the sewer if it's available and they're within 100 feet.
So the 100 feet is what state law requires. So I think the question would be, do you want to become more restrictive than that within 200 feet? Or
Well, here they had to hook up, so-called. What?
If you're within 100 feet by state law, you do have to hook up.
so I think the question
I
would
would
be if
say
you want
that,
to be
but
more
I'm
restrictive.
putting in the word available. I mean, I don't want to be in the problem with the sewer that we're solving with the water.
So what you would propose is all planned unit development shall be served by the New London Sewer Commission for sewage disposal when the system is within 100 feet.
And the service is available. Thinking of the water issue, no?
I think they need to be separate.
Right.
The sewer
I
and
think
the
I
water
think
need
it's
to be
if
separate.
it's within 100 feet, I think the idea is that it would be available in this case of the sewer.
Well, you guys know more about it than I do, but we can be within 100 foot of the water and they can.
Which
say
I think
no.
is different.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the only distinction, yeah. Do you want to recap it? What do you think we should say? Oh, sorry.
If we do separate them, I'm on the mic.
Oh, okay, just keep it close is all. It's easier to hear.
Oh,
Thank
thought
you.
my voice was loud enough. If we do keep them separate, and you agree with that, are you suggesting that we require we allow the sewer hookup, or require the sewer hookup if it's within 100 feet? I thought that was your point that you were raising, Paul. That is. Okay.
Okay, it sounds like we might have, or it looks like we might have some public comment on this as well, but just real quick, is there anybody else from the board who would like to talk about the things we've discussed here?
I would just like some clarity on what that is for the.
We're not voting yet, but yeah, go ahead. If you want to, do you want to recap or?
I just want you to tell me.
Okay.
What,
All right.
what is.
Let's do go ahead and you had a comment?
Mike Fallon. I think I was pretty clear that it would be my recommendation and my counsel that you not remove any of the current language that has a limiting impact on growth based upon sewer availability. And you're moving into areas that are really dangerous and quite volatile. And you can expose us to a level of development that I don't think is broadly hoped for. I would ask for real caution, and in order to understand this better, I'm sorry about the IT failure, but I think I would need to see just exactly what areas are opening up or not opening up based upon this language. And I wouldn't like to see it just kind of fall through the cracks and become adopted and then only come to deal with its consequences later. And I tell you, nobody in this room knows the full consequences of the language you're discussing right now.
Thank you. Are there other comments from the public? Okay, so then back to the board. Let's try to regroup and figure out exactly what we're talking about. Do you want to walk through it? Yeah.
I think we only have two questions, well, maybe three, in place. One is to strike A and just leave the 75-foot buffer as it stands in whatever section it's in. The second one is Paul's comment about whether or not we do or do not strike the language of the requirement to connect to public sewer and water systems. The third is to make a change and move it to next week, which is where we stand. So, yeah, yeah.
Even striking A would be
Yeah.
enough, I think.
Yep. So since my mic is on, my personal opinion is that the intent of this was to allow for a small-scale infill development. When you are able to see the overlay district in comparison to where the sewer reaches, a good portion of the PUD is actually not developable land. So it actually is not necessarily opening the door to massive amounts of infill development. So I don't see that as a hazard, or whatever the language was that was used. But I am okay with the 75-foot staying. So that's just me.
Yep. Are there others from the board?
I'm agreeing with that.
Okay. Oh, God, I don't know. Yeah. So we're going to, just to walk through then real quick, so we would we'd strike A, right? We would keep the...
Under 7. Under 7.
Yeah, 7A, yeah, sorry. Leaving the 75-foot in 6, so that wouldn't change. And then we would, obviously, to talk about the 5 acres, we talked about that, so you're good there. And then as far as, go down to it. The sewer, we would, what we've heard from Marianne and from Jeremy is that we would remove that requirement.
So continue to propose the striking of number 9 in its entirety.
Correct. That's what you were saying, right, Jeremy? Did I hear you right?
Correct. Okay.
Anyone from the board want to talk on that? Okay. So did you make a motion on that, Jeremy, or not? No? Okay.
Do you need public input? No?
Okay. Are there others on the board who want to talk about this? And obviously there's more than one approach. We could, leave the sewer but not the water. Paul, did you float something like that? I'm sorry if I'm getting confused at this point. Leaving the sewer provision but eliminating the water? I'm trying to remember what you said. I apologize.
Yeah, that was what I said, and I was saying that if they're not within 100 feet, then they wouldn't have to.
Right. Okay.
So Paul, what you would be proposing would be that, so number 9, you would strike the water and you'd be left with sewer service, all planned unit developments shall be served by the New London Sewer Commissioner for sewage disposal when the development is within 100 feet of the sewer system.
That's what I thought I said before.
Okay.
Sorry.
We're
So,
just,
no, just recapping.
we're just checking, Paul.
Yep.
Make-
A lot of moving parts. What's the sentiment of the board on that idea? I know
What's the what?
the sentiment of the board on that idea.
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
Okay, so is there so Jeremy, that's not something you're in favor of, correct?
Adam, can you read that again?
So, sewer service. A planned unit development shall be served by the New London Sewer Commission for sewage disposal when the development is within 100 feet of the sewer system.
So, if you're 150 feet, then it's not required and the development could still occur?
I believe that is what Paul was proposing, but you should pose that question to him.
Say that again, Jeremy, please.
So it's more of a question of how it's written, I guess. If a planned unit development is 75 feet from septic, of sewer, it is required to connect. If it's 150 feet, it is not, because it's crossed that 100-foot threshold. But it's not prohibiting it from happening. It just means they'll need their own ISDS, their own sewer septic system, their own treatment system.
That's how I would read it.
Right. That's right.
Okay.
It's not restrictive.
I'm okay with that. Because you're still allowing development further into
Right.
the already designated PUD overlay. So
Right.
I'm okay with that because it's just saying, hey, if sewer's there, connect to it.
Right.
I would make that motion for that change, the 75-foot change, and striking 6A.
7A.
7A. So I make that messy motion.
For continuance to January 23rd, second zoning amendment
Yep.
public hearing.
That's enough of a change. Okay, so, and Emily seconded? Thank you. All right, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Okay, thank you.
All right. Number 3. So this is to address the side yard setbacks in the R2 zone and the R1 properties that do not have water and sewer. I'm not sure what those waters are for. I think they're for the rec department, but just don't know if they have an event tomorrow or something. But so the current side yard setbacks in the R2 are a minimum of 20 feet on one side of the building that with the requirement that the aggregate of the two sides adds to 50 feet. So if you go down to 20 feet on one side, you must maintain 30 feet on the opposite side. There's not a prescription for how this is decided, which one of your neighbors gets the 10 extra feet. And I've tried to find the reasoning for why this was written in originally, and I haven't been able to find that that explains the reasoning behind it. And so what the board has proposed is to simplify this to a minimum of 20 feet on both sides, like exists in our other zones where it's a single side yard setback on both sides of the property. And this would also exist in the R1 properties that are not served by water and sewer, which is a small portion of R1.
Okay, are there comments from the board on this one? Thanks, Adam, for that summary. Yeah, this one is pretty, maybe more straightforward. Are there comments from the public on this one? Questions? Wow, okay. So this one we could actually vote. We could have a motion, since there doesn't seem to be any appetite to move this to the warrant. Or to,
I make a motion to move this to the warrant. Is that correct?
is that correct, Adam?
Yep.
And I'm sorry, who seconded? Marianne, thanks. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that was noticeable improvement in pace, thank you.
Don't.
Yeah, so, yep.
All right, so number 4. So this is the proposed modifications to the accessory dwelling unit section, which I know Tim mentioned at the beginning, a suggestion of a potential change from what is in here, but I'll go through and summarize it as it exists in this document, and then they can choose to discuss it after. To start with, this proposes the potential allowance of a detached accessory dwelling unit. As it currently stands, we only allow attached accessory dwelling units. And so this proposes to allow for the potential of a detached. In addition, it changes the size maximum from 1,000 square feet to 1,250 square feet, and the maximum of 2 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms. On both of those, the motivation of the Housing Commission and the Planning Board when they were working on this is that the lifestyle and working arrangements of many people has evolved in the last few years, and bedrooms are commonly being taken up with work from home offices these days, and when a couple and a child may have been able to easily live in a 2-bedroom, there is now oftentimes a need for a home office for work from home individuals. So obviously it could provide more flexibility for if you were a single parent with 2 kids or whatever scenario you could come up with. And then notably, the proposal allows for 1 attached and 1 detached accessory dwelling unit per single family dwelling outside of the shoreland overlay. It is either or in the shoreland overlay district, which is 250 feet from our major lakes and Messer Pond and Murray Pond, Clark Pond. The ADU is not allowed to be used as a short-term rental, and as part of that, a definition for short-term rental has been proposed to be added to the definitions section that would define it as an accessory use of a residential dwelling unit rented for a fee for a period of less than 90 days. No more than 2 parking spaces per ADU shall be required. The standard is 1 space per bedroom, so if you had a 1-bedroom ADU, you would only need 1 space. If you had a 2-bedroom, you would need 2 bedrooms. The reason that this was being proposed is so that if you did have a 3-bedroom, you wouldn't be required to provide 3 parking spaces. And then the last section pertaining specifically to detached accessory dwelling units discusses that the placement of the unit shall not adversely affect the traffic on roads or safety of pedestrians, and will not otherwise create a safety hazard, and that it shall not be considered an additional dwelling unit for the purposes of determining minimum lot size or density, which is the same language from the attached section of the ordinance. That's a summary.
Thanks, Adam, for that summary. And again, I apologize for jumping the gun earlier. I just was thinking about what I was going to talk about coming into the meeting, and it was still apparently in the top of my brain. But so that was the point that I made earlier, was that I think there would be room for essentially doing overall what we talked about doing in the shoreline overlay, which would be one or the other. I just wanted to take the board's temperature on that.
For the second time, being on the original changes to New London zoning for ADUs, which were essentially forced by the state, it sort of feels like a half measure. But I think that given that there actually is, I'm probably using the wrong terminology, an article in front of the state for 2 ADUs, I think that is already on the horizon. So I think floating the idea of dropping the 2 in our current proposal to 1, but keeping the rest of the changes is something that we should all really discuss, as opposed to it sinking entirely and not making any forward progress on being able to sort of diversify our housing inventory for young people and working people to be able to live in New London.
Thanks, Jeremy. Are there other comments from the board on that idea?
I realize that the state is looking into this, and they may require that we have detached ADUs, and I'm not opposed to that, but I am opposed to allowing both attached and detached. I think that we don't know what the unintended consequences of that will be, and I think the density would be too much. And I realize that I have not been part of this whole discussion going forward, but that's the way I feel about that.
Yep. Thanks, Janet. Appreciate that. Others on the board? Paul?
I can remember, I believe it was a year ago, when the legislature had put in a bill to override the town zoning and allow 4 units on every parcel that was in the town. So this is, as Jeremy said, this is not a issue that we necessarily are going to have control of it as a town, which is a little bit troubling. However, I have talked to a lot of people in the town. I have made the point to them who were upset about potentially having 2 ADUs on each potential lot. And I've talked to them about, they've talked about the cost of building an ADU, the problem of siting it on smaller lots and things like that. The thought that they will be rented out as Airbnbs, and we've tried to address that. But I really think that as a board and as a town, we have to look at a tremendous number of properties, lots in town that already have separate buildings that at relatively low expense. And I've talked to a number of people that look at it as an opportunity to provide lower cost, moderate cost housing. I think having the ability to do detached ADUs makes a lot of sense and will open up potential on these properties that already have 3-car garages that are detached and things like that, and that they could do. In an ideal world, I would feel that we should do it one at a time. I think it's important that the town be as behind this as they were in saying very vehemently to the survey, we need to address housing. We need to allow people who currently can't afford to live here but would love to work here or would love to bring younger families in. But we need as a town to come through that. I think at town meeting, there'll probably be a large discussion of that. I think Jeremy and I and some others probably repeat some of the data and see how people really feel. But I think that if we can come together as a town and pass detached ADUs, not as 2, that will open it up for the future where we can really sit down and address these issues and try to make that type of housing more available for the people that want to live in it.
Thanks, Paul.
Paul, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is, rather than go forward with the opportunity for homeowners to build both a detached and an attached, you would like us to scale back on this and now allow detached, which would be an improvement or an increase over what's allowed now, which is you allowed detached, which would be an increase over what's allowed now, which is only attached. And we'll sort of wait and see what the state does, and also will give us a little bit more time to delve into this more deeply. Is that correct?
That's right. It's in essence what I believe Tim was putting on the table.
Essentially one or the other, Marianne. That was the idea.
So the language, if this is how the board were to choose to move forward, oh, I'm sorry.
I was probably going to say the same thing that you were going to say, Adam, is that we just take E, I, and delete delete from within forward.
Correct.
So EI would simply say one attached ADU or one attached, one AD, and the third time, one attached ADU or one detached ADU per single family dwelling, period.
And
Yeah,
not
that-
make a distinction with the shoreland overlay.
Correct, because that would apply to all zones.
Correct. My feeling is that the rest of our proposed changes should remain, though, that we should accept the increase in size so that we can get more bedrooms in there, so that small families can be in there. Also, a lot of the existing stock that may be repurposed for a detached ADU is already larger than 1,000 square feet, typically if it's a 3-car garage, for example. So I would suggest that our other changes remain.
Yeah, and that wasn't, I should have clarified that earlier, Jeremy. I was only proposing to change what you just enumerated, not anything else. I just wanted to say, too, before we get other comments from the board, we did get a couple emails on this, and I think Adam sent them to everybody, but just to make sure that everybody got them, we had a comment from Ron Rackow and also from Bob Ruggles. They had sort of concerns that we've heard on this. Yeah, please, Marianne.
I can't remember, what was it, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when we first set this up. I had the impression that there was a minimum size. Was there, and do we need to include it?
The RSA allows you to set a minimum size, but we
didn't.
I wasn't here then, so I'm not sure how the discussion went, but we do not have a minimum size. Of the dozen or so that we've had, they've ranged in size from, I think, 350 square feet was the smallest studio, up to the 1,000 square feet.
Thanks, Marianne. Are there other comments from the board? Questions? So we'll open it up to public comment, but just to be clear, because I know that there was concern from folks that we all talked to individually, just running around town and seeing people about the idea of both. So just to be clear that right now we're talking about an either or. So that's kind of setting the table there. Are there comments from the public? Questions? Yep. Okay.
I got the mic, you got the water. So it's Bob Lyon again. Yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly, what Janice said, it also moving to one or the other. I think that's the right move. One question, is there a minimum size lot that you need to have one or the other? And I bring that up because in a previous, I think the town meeting at the college, it was brought up about, should we do this in what's called the core area or in the more rural areas? Because if you put it in the core, you could really get, a pretty dense area. So is there a minimum lot requirement to have one or the other?
No, there's not, and that is part of the state law that governs ADUs. There can be no additional density requirement for the first ADU.
So conceivably, we could see some, I'm not sure this is the right word, but denser areas in town if people decide to start doing this, as opposed to where I live in Trussell Ridge, where it's, sparse.
So as it stands today on the books, every house, every single family property is allowed to have an attached accessory dwelling in it. So this would not change the net to the number that you could expect to see. It would simply change from right now that's required to be attached to the main structure. And going forward, if this were to be adopted, it could be a detached structure.
The other part, and again, I'm just not clear on the intent, because if you have, I was trying to put it into my own thinking. I have 2 acres of land. If I decided to put up a separate freestanding building, I put up a 1,250 square foot, 3-bedroom house, parking for 2 with its own water, gas, electric, and everything else, what's that going to cost me? I've been told $250,000 to $350,000 easily. I'm not going to then rent it out to somebody who can't afford it. If I put that property on my house, I'm going to rent it out to somebody who wants to move to New London and can afford to pay it. So I'm still kind of perplexed by this whole intent, because I hear, well, we're going to put these up, and then people that want to live here, but they can't afford it, and this is going to help, if that's what people are saying. I'm not seeing that part. So if you can help me, I get the part, and I think it's wonderful, attached, detached for a caregiver, and I heard a lady speak to this at one of the town meetings, a caregiver, mom and dad to stay in the house, the kids coming home because they're between jobs. But to think that this is going to be part of a workforce housing or people that can afford it, I'm missing that. I'm just not getting that. So can you help me understand that?
Sure. So I think there's a variety of motives for what drives anybody to put in an accessory dwelling unit, even attached. Sometimes, like Maureen mentioned at the winter gathering, it's a motivation of a companion on your property and to help you maintain it. There's not necessarily a financial motivation to it, but it's a symbiotic relationship. She gets to stay in her house. Someone who maybe was struggling to find housing has found housing. From a detached standpoint, I can share with you the anecdotes of the calls I get asking me about detached on a regular basis when I share with them that's not allowed currently. The three categories that I sort of see them falling into on a regular basis are my elderly parent needs to relocate, and it really would make sense to have them on the same property as me, but I don't want to share a wall with them, and I'd like to have my privacy and have them have their privacy. The flip side of that, you get the sort of baby boomer aged parent calling and saying, my child would like to relocate and come back here. They're struggling to find housing in the area. Again, I want the privacy. And then the third component of that, and this speaks somewhat to the difficult landscape of childcare, is that families, I think, are looking more and more at live-in au pairs through the au pair program, or simply through a nanny and providing housing as part of that accommodation. But again, they want the privacy. And so I would say those are the three examples that I get questions for on a regular basis, where the financial side of things does not really play into their equation. Of course, those units will still exist once that scenario moves on, whether their child buys a home or their parent moves on to the next level of care that's needed, or their kids grow up and they don't need a nanny anymore. And so then those units may become available to your typical market rate, renter. And one thing on the sort of workforce housing, and I do think the term gets used for, in multiple manners. There's an official workforce housing as, governed by state law and RSAs, and that's really a Twin Pines type of development. And then there's the more general housing for the workforce, that there's a lot of people who, work in the area that would not qualify to live in the legally, dedicated workforce housing that has particular income maximums.
Thanks, Adam. Yep.
Thank you, that was helpful. And I agree with you, I get that whole part completely, and I liked how you minimize the workforce housing, because I don't see this ADU thing as addressing that at all, unless people have a lot of money to come in and rent. I mean, $350,000 house, you're not going to rent it for $1,000 a month. Just a question, what is the definition of a short-term rental?
So the proposed definition is an accessory use of a residential dwelling unit rented for a fee for a period of less than 90 days. And the discussion that centered around the time period of less than 90 days was that I know that we have at least one accessory dwelling unit that has routinely been rented to traveling healthcare professionals, so occupational therapist, PT, and nurse. And I know from talking with this particular property owner that their contracts have been 90-day extensions for their housing. They're at New London Hospital on a 90-day contract. They need 90-day housing. And so the the motive for writing less than a period of 90 days would be to allow that to continue to exist for that
But
second.
we're not changing that, we're keeping it at 90 days, right?
That is entirely new.
That's new. That's a proposed addition.
That definition
what
does
is it
not
now?
exist currently.
There isn't one.
Oh, it's not defined?
Correct.
So you want to define it?
Yes.
Okay, I'll have to think about that one, thank you.
Okay, thanks. We have a couple comments from the board real quick, and then we'll get to, sorry, I apologize, then we'll get right back to public comment.
Mr. Fallon?
Sorry.
One of the things that you might want to consider in terms of the detached ADU is not a standalone newly built house. It could be a modification as a second floor of a garage. So there are a whole varieties of detached ADUs that could meet a number of different requirements.
Yep, just one more comment from the board, I'm sorry. You're getting your steps in, I appreciate it. Yeah.
It's a good thing he had some water, though. I think, again, to Adam's point on sort of symbiotic relationships, actually, you may rent it, because it may not be filled with your family or other people at given times, and for a 3-month stint, there may be a traveling nurse that is looking for someplace very close to the hospital where they want to stay, and that's a little bit of additional income. It may not pay for it, but it is additional income. So these structures don't need to function 100% of the time as one single use. They can be multiple uses. So there really is that advantage to them, and especially when you combine it. Yes, we understand your point. It's very expensive to build one brand new, but there's lots of garages, and most of Adam's questions, or a substantial amount of them, are, I have this garage. Why can't I have, quote unquote, the granny flat on the second floor? It's already there. So there are a lot of uses.
Yep. Yeah, now, please, thank you. Waited so patiently.
Bob Ruggles on Bunker Road. So two things. One, you mentioned that I had sent an email in, and thank you to the board, because the crux of that email was it should be either or for now, so incrementally. Use the terminology from the gentleman in the back or wherever he is. I think incrementally makes sense. It doesn't prohibit doing both in the future if this works well. Second is someone, Racco, you mentioned, Ron and Mary are not here tonight. So a question he had, which I think is a valid one, is the enforcement. So what happens when the current owner moves? What happens in the future potentially if we have both? And someone comes in and says, this is a great opportunity because I'm not going to rent it for $1,000, I'm going to rent it for $3,000, whatever am I going to rent it for, but it could become a business. And so what's the enforcement mechanism as we go forward to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where there are just businesses all over the place? Thank you.
Thanks.
So we've had this experience in the context of a property selling and the new owner not being a permanent resident. So if you're not aware that the ordinance as it's written, one of the units is required to be the domicile of the property owner, so either the ADU or the primary. We had an approved accessory dwelling unit that was occupied and the property sold, and the new owners are not going to be residing here full-time at this point. And so, it is hard for us to track that. However, we get monthly, I get a list of the properties that have transferred. I saw that the property had transferred. We reached out to the property owner just to make sure that they understood what requirements were surrounding that. And so obviously a conversation ensued there. And unfortunately, we lost the accessory dwelling unit that was rented to a local tradesman. And because they were not going to occupy it, they had to remove the kitchen of the ADU and open it back up to the rest of the house. So, we try to follow it, to the best that we can. And then we also rely on people letting us know. As far as short-term rentals goes, we do keep an eye, especially our assessing department, on what is on the short-term rental websites. And so then obviously, neighbors typically would let us know if an accessory dwelling unit were being rented on a short-term basis. Similarly to, we had a short-term rental that was renting for, to host potential events. And so, we found out about it and we follow up with the individual. So.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah. Thanks, Karen.
Hi, my name is Karen Epstein, and so nice to see everybody again. And I guess the question I have is, under the accessory dwelling unit, it's E, and all applicable setbacks shall be met. So in terms of the core district, I know the lots are small there, and I think in some of the meetings, quarter acre lots has come up. And what setbacks are we referring to there? So I just want a clarification on that.
Yep. Do you want me to
I guess
answer
the
that one
question
first,
was,
or- Sorry.
I guess in worst case, I was just imagining, like if someone had kind of a small lot and they could meet the side setback and the front, could they then potentially put a small accessory dwelling unit very close to their existing home? So that's what I was
To
kind of...
their existing home, yes. The distance between the accessory dwelling unit and the lot lines would be the same as what exists in that zone for a single family. So in R1, that would be the same 25 feet in the front and the 15 feet on the sides and the rear for the accessory dwelling unit as well as a single family. And those setbacks would be the same whether you are adding an attached accessory dwelling unit to the single family or whether it was a separate structure as a detached accessory dwelling unit. So there wouldn't be any buildings built closer to a lot line than what can exist today.
But I guess, because I think in one of the sessions, there was an example brought up from, I think it was in Warner, that had their accessory dwelling units. There were some distance requirements from the main house. So I think maybe I probably didn't explain it very well. But I'm wondering, on a smaller lot where you have the main house, would there be any distance required between the main house and the separate accessory dwelling unit?
Yep. And I remember that conversation now, Karen, that there was at one of the Housing Commission meetings, I believe, conversations of internal setbacks between detached and the structure, and there wasn't anything proposed for internal, there was discussion about both a minimum setback and a maximum setback. Neither one is proposed in this.
So would that be something we'd want to consider then for these smaller lots? I mean, I know what is being discussed is that there's likely not going to be an explosion of development in this regard, but just thinking of unanticipated consequences. And in fact, that I think, Adam, you gave the example that one accessory dwelling unit was like 350 square feet, so you can go pretty small. So I'm just putting that out there. Would we want to consider having some sort of minimum distance? Because I'm just picturing something, maybe there's 10 feet separation or 5 feet. They don't have a common wall, but they have the two separate units. So I would just put that something that we may want to consider. Thank you.
Just a little bit of history. In 2016, when we were contemplating detached ADUs, we did have that conversation. And part of that conversation was that other structures, accessory structures, garages, sheds, do not have a minimum between, and it didn't seem to make any sense to apply that to a detached ADU. So if your garage can be 4 feet from your house, a detached ADU could be 4 feet from your house. That was where it stopped at that point in time.
So, go ahead, Marion.
I don't want to shut down the conversation about this. Do you have a particular reason for investigating that, or wondering, are you thinking that it needs that? What is your thinking on it?
Yeah,
Yes.
Karen, yeah.
I don't anticipate it. I mean, I'm not planning on putting one on my property, but I do live in the part of town where we have some smaller lots. And, these, when you put these new opportunities in place and you have unintended consequences, and I'm just sort of picturing, what the neighborhood could look like. And as you say, you're not anticipating there's going to be a lot of development in this regard, but there could be. And I do see a difference between a shed where I'm keeping my tools and a unit where someone is living. Because with that, you have density plus intensity of living. You may have another car, potentially 2 other cars. So that it's just, I think there is a difference between a garage and a shed where people aren't living, and a dwelling unit where you do have, someone coming and going and cars, et cetera. So I think it would be something that you may want to consider.
The detached or attached both have the same requirements for parking, so it needs to be provided for, whether it's attached or detached, or what the distance is between the two. So the lot has to be able to support it. So the fact that it's detached or attached, it still has to follow the zoning district's regulations for setbacks, and then also the additional requirements for parking for the ADUs, whether they're attached or not.
Just from my own perspective, it would be something I think would be worthwhile to consider, a distance between 2 separate living units. That's what I'm
Karen, I had the same
suggesting.
feeling when we first discussed it.
Yeah.
Sort of a knee-jerk, I'd say. And then I eliminated, well, the attached one is right there. And in our old house, we had a garage that was right next door to the house but wasn't attached. And then I realized, the owner is the one that's going to be building this. And they're much more likely to be concerned about getting it as far as they can away from the house as putting it nearby. They may be. But, so that's what we regulated. If the owner decides to put it right next to the house, he's decided that for a reason. And I would say it's less intrusive in almost all cases than if he put it the maximum distance that we've allowed to put there. So I think that was the thinking. But I agreed with you when you started.
And there could be aesthetic reasons too, Karen, just in terms of like maybe you have a short breezeway or something connecting, a small ADU in the back to the front, or maybe you want to be close if it is a situation where it's elderly parent or it's kid, a younger family with kids, or who knows. That did come up, like others have alluded to, but it felt like that was maybe a little too prescriptive in that case.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments? Yep. Yep.
Rob Prohl, down in Elkins. First question I have is, how do you define residency for somebody that owns the ADU? How long do they have to live in the house? If they live there one day out of the year, is that their residency, or is there a specified period of time?
So it's steeped in state law, and unfortunately, I think there's a misconception that it's 6 months in a day, but we know that some people have more than 2 homes, and so they don't spend 6 months in a day at any one home. And so it's much more complicated than things that we deal with. The town clerk has to make the determination partially when someone's like registering a car as to whether or not it's resident or non-resident. And there are a variety of things that go into that. It does not have to do with voter status necessarily, because you are not forced to be a voter. You can certainly choose to be a resident and not be a registered voter. But state law is what determines if somebody is a resident or not, and the particulars of that, I don't have all of.
Well, that gets me to the second comment, which is the enforcement issue. For example, on a short-term rental, you rely on the neighbor to rat out his neighbor, which then does create lots of hard feelings. So, I think at some point, maybe the selectmen or the town should look at having some enforcement again. Because we don't really have much enforcement at all. It's all based on, whether it's a building permit or somebody coming back out to check to make sure they didn't cut down more trees than they should. But the same thing with an ADU. You're going to rely on neighbors to say, hey, well, this person now is running it out for somebody for, a month or 2 months or 60 days or less than 90 days, but who's going to enforce that? And That's my question. The other comment was, if somebody didn't want to spend, I think Bob mentioned, if someone didn't want to spend $400,000 to build an ADU, could they put in a manufactured home? Would that be allowed?
So, and that's in state law that you can't restrict against manufactured homes. I will say that there are different levels. So there's pre-site built, which a modular, for example, that is not necessarily a manufactured home. There are different HUD requirements for the building code there.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve?
I first wanted to talk a little bit about the concerns I have about the process that has brought us here. Steve Root, still. The ADU proposals, as I understand it, came out of the Housing Commission from the summer. And yet, the latest minutes of any meetings of the Housing Commission were October. And the same is true of the Planning Board. And so I tried to go back to see what the concerns were and how they were addressed. And while I saw some concerns, I didn't see much being addressed. The concerns were raised in October minutes concerning enforcement. There was a consultant to the Housing Commission. My question is, did the consultant produce a written report? Because I didn't see anything. No. And did the Housing Commission actually vote to recommend the zoning changes that we're dealing with the ADUs?
Do you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, and Peter, I don't want to speak for you. If you can certainly jump in, but yes, the Housing Commission put forward their version, and then there was a work session. The videos are online from those when the Housing Commission and the Planning Board worked together. Not everything that the Housing Commission proposed to the Planning Board was proposed in what you see here. I would say there was a collaborative effort.
So the Housing Commission did produce a recommendation, correct? Yeah, please do. Be sure to write down.
Yes, Steve. Peter Nichols, I'm chairman of the Housing Commission, and Adam is correct. We held at least 6 meetings specifically on these items with full discussions, hearings, meetings were posted. I must say the attendance was quite low, and which is disturbing because we are as open and transparent as we can be. We want as much comment and support where we're good and comment and support where we're bad because we work for the people. We also are an advisory board. We're not a regulatory board such as you are. Our goal is to research, listen, find the best ideas, deliberate on them, and make recommendations to the planning board and the selectmen. So we held a number of meetings, and we also had several work sessions with the planning board, which were public meetings, and these issues were discussed. Minutes were taken at every meeting, and I must say that we had long deliberation from our Housing Commission on many of these points. But it was well thought out. The consultant didn't do a formal report per se, in a sense that we're looking for a bound volume. But during the time that we had meetings with Steve Whitman of Resilience Planning and Design from Plymouth, who's a very well-known planner and actually a professor as well, so he's a teacher. He had a lot of good ideas, and so the materials that we received were 1-page, 2-page in the working session, and they became part of the verbiage that we had recommended and eventually with the work session with the planning board came forth with.
Yeah, and I would just add that the Housing Commission's work was really invaluable to the planning board. It was very collaborative in those work sessions, and there was a lot of good discussion.
So I guess my concern, though, is that there were no materials ever posted from those meetings of the Housing Commission. The minutes, you say, were taken, but there were meetings in November, which I presume were where these approvals came. They're not posted. I wasn't able to recreate. And so, for example, in the 1 minutes that I saw, you had the Mr. Whitman, the consultant, pointed out that there could be unintended consequences from the proposal. He was addressing the multiple ADUs at that, but it seemed to just go by the boards. I didn't see anything other than the final proposal, which was 2 ADUs on every lot. And so I feel like the transparency has been a little less than what it should be, and what are very serious and important proposals. But was there any economic analysis done of the benefit to affordable housing or workforce housing? And part of the reason I ask is I agree with the comments that you cannot build a building in New London. You can't convert a garage or a barn at anything like a cost that would translate into low-cost housing. It might add diversity of housing, I'll grant you that, but you're not going to get low-cost housing. And yet I think, I have the feeling, because I keep hearing this, that we need affordable housing, and here's an ADU proposal for a detached ADU on every property in town, and that it's a gesture that will not address the affordable housing problem. And so I also hear the anecdotes of people want something for mom and dad, or for the kids, or for the caretaker, and they might want to convert a barn or a garage. That's great, but this proposal is for a detached ADU on every property in town. 1,250 square feet of living space, plus non-living space. You can have a garage off of it. You can have screen porch. And that is doubling the density of every property. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but it's not going to happen very much because the owner has to live there. They have to live there. As I read this, you could create an area, build a 1,250 square foot property, lease it for 100 years. The right to transfer the lease, you can sublet. That would seem to be allowed because rentals are allowed. You can't do under 90 days, but you can do 100 years. Was there any consideration to trying to restrict this? I'll give you another example. I believe that the ADU provision back in the day said that when dealing with a property that, maybe this was a proposal, that only a building that had existed for 3 or 5 years could be converted. This is all the discussion of how you could take a garage or a barn and make it living space. All sounds good, but I think it veers our focus away from the fact that we are authorizing a separate building, 1,250 square feet, on every property in town, and that is one more big increase in density. This is a small town that's already very dense. If a brilliant developer comes along and says, I will build you a 1,250 square foot property, it'll be $300,000, but I got financing lined up, your cash flow for rental will be wonderful, and it's going to be like solar panels. You're going to have a business that would do this for people. So I would like to see some restrictions that would take the detached ADU idea and match it up with the rationale that we're hearing that makes sense, such as converting existing buildings that have been on the property for 5 years. And not every lot in town gets a detached ADU. Build out is the concern here, and we've already heard proposals that are going to increase build out. This one for detached ADUs, including in the waterfront areas, is a proposal that could produce a lot of build out. And so, just as a specific suggestion, you should limit any rentals not only to more than 90 days, but to less than 2 years without automatic renewals. It's just a suggestion. Another suggestion is detached ADUs can convert existing buildings, but not construct a brand new building. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Convert an existing barn or garage, but not build a whole new building.
Yep, one more comment from the board real quick, and then we'll take another public comment.
I think we will never convince you, Steve, even though we've had 2 per year for 7 years. We're actually now not proposing an increase. So I know it sounds the perfect opposition to what we're proposing to say that we are doubling the density, but historically it isn't proving that. And we have done the math on this. And actually, with the 2 ADUs and using the last 7 years, conservatively doubling the ADU development per year to 4 from 2, and conservatively assigning an occupancy of 4 from 2 per bedroom, the total increase is actually 16 people to New London. It's below what is projected, which is our 26 people per increase per year by both the census and by the Office of Strategic Initiatives. So this change is the change that we were proposing, not the change now, because it's actually not an increase. We're just allowing detached. So we're not saying 2 anymore. So we're actually not doubling anything. It already is in place, and by state law, it has to be in place. We're saying, okay, we're going to open it up to detached. So we're not doubling anymore. Sounds great in opposition, but we already have done that. That the ADUs are allowed as attached. And we're saying or. So now somebody is either or attached or detached. So it's actually the same number that's already in place in the ordinance now. So I wanted to be clear. I also wanted to throw the numbers out there that historically it hasn't been the mushrooms showing up everywhere. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Come back.
Yeah, one more thing, Paul and then Steve.
I just feel at this point that I have to come to the defense of the Housing Commission and to Peter. I was at a lot of those meetings. They were all noticed on every notice that we are able to send out in a town that doesn't have a newspaper. Volunteers came, talked for hours about all these issues, okay? No one from the public showed up. It's great that you're here tonight, but no one showed up. I'm sorry.
Epstein, Karen
showed up.
Yeah. And Rich.
And
John Ellis.
I don't want to be negative to the people that didn't show up, but to say that it wasn't transparent, there's plenty of chairs. Every word was either, put on tape or could have been heard. And we struggled with it. We knew that we needed to get out, but the Housing Commission did everything that they could, I believe, to make this transparent and get the input that everybody was invited to make.
Yeah. So
Thanks, Paul.
To respond to Jeremy's point, the current zoning ordinance allows attached ADUs, and the proposal is detached ADUs. And so I stand by my statement that we are now doubling the potential for having separate dwellings on each lot. Admittedly, the attached ADUs hasn't produced a huge influx of new housing, but I'm saying that this proposal would allow the construction of a house with 1,250 square feet of living space plus non-living space, separate from the existing house, and that can be done on a commercial basis, in my view, in a way that will be much more impactful than attached ADUs. I just want to say that my concern is build out, and it's a long-term view. Adam and I have talked about this, and I understand that 20 years ago, the planning board focused on build out and adopted a master plan and promoted zoning that would keep our build out at less than 10,000 people. Build out has no time horizon, and it's a scary number, but there's so many things that have been done now that promote build out. I pointed out some things earlier with the PUD, but you have the reduction in lot size in the commercial district 2 years ago, which according to Ken Jakes, the chair of the Springfield New London Water Precinct, had a potential of 108 additional units. You've got 60 units going in at Twin Pines. You've got Continuum's proposal. And yet, I understand the planning board does not believe in a build-out study. So what is the current build-out in New London? Do we know? We don't. And So why is it important? It's important because of the water precinct is got wells that had a 30-year life. They're in year 28. They're at 75% capacity. They're doing well. They're going to get past 30 years. But new water supply is hard to come by, if you heard Ken Jake speak about it. But there's so many other things besides housing. The Housing Commission was focused on the housing issue. It's a serious issue. But we also have a transfer station. We have police, fire protection. You have septic systems that impact our lakes. You have impervious surfaces, stormwater runoff. All of these things are part of planning in addition to housing, and build-out is crucial. If you heard Ken Jakes talk about it, he mentioned build-out repeatedly because of the concern, because the Water Commission is up against it. And build-out, he said, we can take 1.5 units a year, the current rate. We can do 5 units that are being proposed for that was mentioned earlier, but he can't do 50 units. And so traffic, all of these things are affected by build-out, and yet all we're doing is talking about ways to promote housing and additional build-out. And I think that we need to find a restriction. Adam, give you an example. You mentioned the state law on ADUs doesn't allow us to reduce, to impose any density requirements. That's not true about detached, is it? It's only true for attached.
That's correct.
So in a large number of the lots in town in various districts are smaller than the minimum lot size requirement. Could we allow detached ADUs only on those lots where the resulting density would meet the density allowed for that R2, instead of if you have an R2 lot that's only a half acre, 3/4 of an acre, and they're a lot, that you wouldn't be able to add a detached ADU there?
So and that conversation did happen during the work session between the Planning Board and the Housing Commission, and the members at that work session felt that the existing restrictions of setbacks and other if you had wetlands or, what your parking needs were, would essentially dictate whether those smaller substandard lots would have the capability of constructing a detached, or if they were really bound to only have feasibility for an attached. And the members at the work session felt like it was enough to allow the potential for either, but then to let those other standards that are already built into the zoning ordinance guide that process of the decision, whether it made sense on that property for an attached or a detached.
Okay, well.
Getting back to affordable housing and what the goal of all of this is, because it was talked about a lot in these sessions. If you can get housing that's more affordable, you probably would like that to be in the core. Mm-hmm. People can walk, it cuts down on traffic, cuts down on a lot of problems. So to say that we should not want affordable housing in the core where people can walk to stores or they can walk to Main Street or whatever is really not good planning. There may be challenges with septic, there may be challenges with water, but they get fixed or they don't, but we shouldn't restrict it. And the experts, the consultant, felt that there was a good chance that you would have affordable housing probably nearer in rather than further out.
But nearer in, I'm talking not about keeping it out of the core. I'm talking about the lots that are smaller than required. In the core, the lot sizes and the density requirements are pretty small.
I understand that. They'll either work it out or they won't.
And we don't have any idea what the build-out will be.
Well,
we don't have an idea what the build-out would be, but to one of your comments about 20 years ago, New London did a lot of work to restrict development and control build-out. I think they did a great job because in 2 decades, we are 100 persons less than the projected growth per decade, which is actually a 40% less. So I think our ordinance was well-written to prevent growth, which is basically what it was. So the numbers that I was talking about when I was saying that there were 26, if we're using census data and strategic initiatives data, there's an allowable, or an estimated 26 persons per year growth in New London. That is actually 36, because we aren't growing at the rate that is projected. And the reason we're not growing at the rate that's projected is because the opportunities for that growth really aren't here. I'll go back to the studies that we did in the planning board, and the responses from the town were that there is an overall lack of affordable opportunities and diversity of opportunities for those working in our community. And there's a difficulty of young families to afford to live in New London. That doesn't say workforce. It says diversity and opportunities.
And so we've had people say, we don't think that this proposal will result in any meaningful affordable housing. It may result in meaningful unaffordable housing. That's my point, is that it could result in a lot of growth, but not affordable housing. And so I firmly believe that the rationale for this and the other changes is a belief that it will promote affordable housing. And I'm with the people that say, I know how much it costs to build, I know how much it costs to convert a garage to a housing unit, and it's not going to be affordable. And so it's a gesture, but it's not a solution to a problem. It opens up other problems. That's my concern.
I think in summary, the board feels it isn't the solution, it's a part of the solution.
Yep. Sorry.
I said, in general, and I don't want to speak for the board that's sitting here, but I can speak for the ADU boards that have been assembled in the past, is that it isn't the solution to the problem, it's a part of a solution.
Thanks, Jeremy. Sir, please.
Hey, good evening. My name's Tom Elliott. I own 46 Mountain Road. I own an ADU that's pre-existed for several decades. And I have some questions and comments tonight. My first comment would be, I think I disagree with the suggestion that adding more ADUs won't overall impact the availability of housing. I think there are a lot of people renting something that's perhaps less expensive than they can afford, but it's all that's available. I think there are some doctors that would be happy to pay $2,000 a month to live in a more expensive detached ADU and then make available an attached ADU that maybe is half the size and half the cost. Housing is fluid. We see it as a market. And I think that changing the market conditions generally to allow more housing of different types will make it more likely that people will find the housing that they need and they can afford. So I encourage us to think about that fluidity and the matching of different people and different incomes to different housing types. So I have a couple questions. My first question is, will this ordinance apply only to new ADUs that are proposed and constructed? Are existing ADUs grandfathered? Has the town attorney weighed in on this?
So the town attorney, we did meet last week to go over all of our zoning amendments. And the answer I got when I asked that question was that it would apply to the accessory dwelling units who have gone through the proper channels of approval through the accessory dwelling unit conditional use permit. So there may be some ADUs that have existed. I mean, for example, I know of one that I was dealing with today that it has existed since the 50s. That is an entirely separate scenario.
When would the cutoff date be? When the workforce housing, the ADU amendment came about in 2016?
This was 2016, but we did have an addition before that I think was 2001. That's a good question. I'm not sure. They didn't tell us, or they didn't advise on that. And I'm not familiar enough with what the ordinance was from 01 to 16. I don't believe it was a conditional use process, though.
Okay. Next question. Under the proposed language or the definition of a short-term rental, will that help me understand how this new regime, as proposed, would affect the short-term rental capabilities of the main unit, not the accessory dwelling unit?
So it's not intended to impact that.
Okay.
If the property owner chose to live in the accessory dwelling unit, they could rent out their primary, just as a single-family homeowner could rent out their primary.
Unrestricted by the 90-day rule?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I have a comment about the 90-day rule. My accessory apartment is often rented to folks working at the hospital, and I think 90 days is too long a period to require. In my experience, many of them are not sure that they're going to stick around. They may have a 90-day contract, but frankly, the labor situation puts really the power in their hands to try it out. We've rented to people who were commuting up from the seacoast or even Massachusetts, who were like, they had a 90-day contract, but they weren't sure they wanted to be here and wanted to try it out. So they wouldn't have signed a 90-day deal with me if I'd had to require that. So I think you might want to think about restricting it to maybe 30 days, but 90 days seems inflexible for the audience that you're trying to support here, which is healthcare professionals or others who come up as travel nurses. So that's some feedback. And I think the last thing I'll say on this is I fully support ADUs. I think they're a really smart, low-impact solution comparatively for addressing the housing crisis. I think the idea of allowing attached and detached is, that's a bold move. I'm not familiar with other towns that have gone that far. Maybe they have and I missed it, but I think the one place where I might agree with some of the folks who spoke tonight is that there probably should be a standard that doesn't make it by right attached and detached on every lot. And I know that the shoreland was exempted, but maybe there's a density requirement. You have to have a lot above a certain size to be considered for both. And I also can understand in a town that maybe isn't real change oriented that coming at this with attached and detached in this spring of 2024 voting might be too much too soon, and that paring that back is, I guess I'm not sure if you actually did,
We haven't acted on that yet, but that's our proposal as it stands.
I can understand why you would choose to do that and preserve this down the road, but I guess if the Housing Committee and the Planning Board were to consider allowing both down the road, despite my obvious advocacy for this, I think having a standard that said you had to have a lot of a certain size or some other standards maybe I haven't thought of would be wise before we open the barn to quote unquote double the density. I think that's a little bit of a scare tactic to describe it that way, but I do think really small lots having that by right could have unintended consequences, which apparently the Housing Commission's consultant raised that as well, if I understood that history. And I think I would too, even though I generally support this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Bob Lyon again. 3 comments. I want to go back to a point that Karen had made earlier, and it actually started off with the first speaker of the evening. I forget who it was. But they made the point, and it was about the discussion on the setback, 75 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet. And the point that was being made is we drive around New London, and we do have some areas where there's a lot of growth, but you don't typically see it. And what I'm thinking of is Fenwood. You just drive right by. You'd never know that whole complex was back there. Hilltop, you don't see that from the main road. And I think that's, to me and to my family, that's one of the reasons we moved here. We have a beautiful town, and I don't want to be driving around and seeing multiple units on small lots, and now we're not going to have any direction about how close it can be to the main unit. So I guess if I have a quarter-acre lot, I can put up a 400-square-foot house a foot away from my main residence, and that would be okay. I'm not getting that. I don't see that. And I think, I hate to say it, but people are clever, and people will work to get around different regulations, but to provide some guidance about, I don't know what that number is, 10 feet, 20 feet, 15 feet, but it's certainly not 1 foot. And you think of the neighbors, and they're going to go out every day, and they're going to see this extra unit built next to this house. It's a foot away. You have more people living there. I think it'd be mistaken if we don't address that and specify it. That was my first point. The second point, I I'm a Green Bay Packers fan. I didn't get to watch the game this past week, but we're lucky enough to have YouTube TV, and we recorded it. I went home, I watched the game, it was great. From what I'm hearing from Steve, he couldn't do that. Going back, looking at Housing Committee, I don't know what other committees he was trying to get records on, he could not do that. There were no minutes posted, there were no videos posted. I'm not being accusatory, mistakes happen. To me, coming from a corporate world where I led many project teams, getting out minutes quickly, promptly, and accurately was a price of entry. And if we want to have an informed public knowing what's going on, I think that should be top of mind. And I'm not trying to point anybody out here in particular, but saying that people aren't showing up for meetings, you know, people might not want to go to the meetings. Maybe they have other stuff going on, but the information needs to be there. I mean, just because somebody doesn't show up, it doesn't mean that we don't have the information. That needs to be posted. So I think if we can do better on that, I would suggest that we try to make that top of mind. I mean, the selectmen's minutes come out all the time. Citizen committee minutes come out all the time. They're right there. I couldn't make the last meeting. I read the minutes. It was great. So enough on that. My last point, this build-up question, I spoke a lot about that earlier. What I'm hearing is everything that we're doing tonight is trying to increase the available housing. For whatever reason, call it workforce, lower cost, higher cost, caretakers, family, kids, parents, grandparents, we're trying to increase it. We've asked what that build-out number is going to be. We haven't gotten an answer. So my takeaway is we simply don't know. And tell me right now if that's not being fair. So when I go out into the public and people say, hey, you went to that meeting, what do they expect this to be? If I tell them we don't know, is that fair? Because that's where I'm at right now. It could be low, but we don't know, so it could be high. I mean, right now, since we don't know, those probabilities are almost equal. We just, so is that okay to tell people that? We don't know what the impact is going to be? I'd like to get an answer.
The answer is no.
It's not fair to say that? Why?
For 7 years, there's been 2 per year. That's the data. That's the data we have. We can project it into the future.
But now we're talking about reducing that septic requirement, right?
No, you're mixing issues.
I'm mixing issues.
Correct.
So I thought we were going to take away that septic issue, where you wouldn't have to hook up to septic.
We're talking about ADUs now. Those other.
No, it's just talking about growth in general.
Oh,
We're not
okay.
talking growth in, not just ADUs. This is growth in general. And the elephant in the room that we keep avoiding is water. I sat here and listened to Ken Jakes, a very smart guy, and he was laying out a warning. We can get 1.5 units per year. Okay, so I guess what I can tell people, we are not expecting to go more than 1.5 units per year. Is that fair?
So first
You're
of all,
shaking your head no. Does that mean no?
I'm not going to speak for the water precinct, sir.
No, I'm asking you, is 1.5 units per year growth, is that what you're telling us we can expect to have?
I responded to the ADUs. So
Is that right? 1.5 ADUs per, okay, so we don't have an answer for that.
I do want to be clear that the water precinct boundaries are not the same as the town lines.
I'm asking a simple
So it is a
question.
very different-
How many units per year, ADUs, let's make it very simple. How many ADUs do we expect to have going forward year per year? And I'm
So
told it was
history-
1.5.
Well, we're not setting a maximum, so there's not something to hold us to.
Asking what to
As far as-
expect, so if somebody
Bob,
asks me.
Let me finish, please.
Go ahead, go
So
ahead.
in the 7 years that we have been going through this process, we have had 14. So I think it is reasonable to expect that that is the standard that would increase.
Perfect.
I will say there have been years when we have had 0, and there have been years when we have had 3.
Perfect.
So it is not an even standard to every year.
So I'm going to tell people that they can expect, on average, it's based on history, 1.5 units per year. That's what people can expect.
Adam, how
2,
many of
1.5.
the 14 connected to the water system?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but let me just think quick to where they
I
are.
wasn't thinking about the water system just then. I'm just thinking about overall growth, trying to get that number, because the question's been asked 3 times tonight. What is the build-out? And we haven't gotten an answer.
So to answer Paul's question, I think less than 2 or 3 have been connected. Several of them are in the waterfronts, which very little of the waterfront has access to the water precinct, and then Elkins, Laurel Lane has a couple, Wilmot Center Road. I think Maureen is on town water. Bunker has one, no town water. So it's a small portion of what exists currently.
That was his
that's
question, that
actually
wasn't
on-
mine.
Okay.
My
Well, I'm
question
sorry,
was,
I'm
what
answering
is
a
the
question that was
expected
asked.
growth rate per year? The answer I got was 1.5 units.
No, that's
No,
not true.
that's not correct.
I said 2. 7 years, 14
Okay,
units.
2. Thank you. 2.
Yeah,
Thank you.
for ADUs, correct. So we actually, did you have another comment you'd like to make?
Well, I just had one suggestion. This concern about the look and the distance between a detached unit and the main house, seems to me that there's probably language in the ordinance already that could be repurposed that guides the owner to have their accessory dwelling unit look like their main house or fit into the neighborhood. There's got to be some standard or language that would...
That came up in the discussions as well, that we don't actually have design guidelines for the town, and so it was determined by the planning board in conjunction with the housing commission when we met that that was probably not an advisable path, because you can have, like, I live in a colonial as an example, and if I wanted to put a small ADU out back, I wouldn't make a mini colonial because that would look insane, because that's just not how colonials are, right? So we wanted to not be too prescriptive there, because we're not doing that with the main dwellings already.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm fine with it as written. I'm just
Yeah,
suggesting
that was just giving you the backstory on why.
I don't think the distance is actually the underlying concern. I think it's how it'll look when it's done, and I think that could be addressed if that's really a sticking point.
Yep, thank you. So we need to
summarize where we're at?
Yeah,
Just
we need
so
to
I-
try to move on a little bit. Do you want to? Oh, sorry, John, go ahead. Yeah, you haven't talked, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're talking detached units, and my name is John Wilson. Good evening. We're talking the detached units, and I suspect we're also including the ones in the shoreland district. Okay, I have a few comments with regard to that. Please bear with me, I know it's getting a little late. I'll try and keep you awake. In 2016, 3 people who are now in the room, plus Paul Gorman, engaged in multiple meetings concerning detached accessory dwelling units being permitted on lakefront properties. 2 of the people involved represented lake associations, which were concerned with protecting lake quality, and 2 represented the planning board. The result of these discussions was the matter was dropped. Now comes the planning board not only once again proposing detached accessory dwelling units in the shoreline overlay district, but units with 3 bedrooms instead of 2, and an increase in square footage from 1,000 square feet to 1,250 square feet. There are a number of present lakefront homes that are 1,250 square feet or less. Present lakefront zoning requires a minimum of 200 feet of frontage and 2 acres for a single residence. This comports with the state's desire to limit lake loading. However, there are also many grandfathered lakefront lots that are much smaller than this required size. Some as small as 1/3 of an acre with 50 feet of frontage. Maintaining water quality on a lake is a constant battle, with such concerns as invasive weed growths and more recently cyanobacteria blooms, which can have a devastating effect on the safety of the lake. Cyanobacteria blooms have become a major concern of the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, New Hampshire Lakes Association, Lake Sunapee Protective Association, and many of the other local lake associations. Both the invasive weeds and the cyanobacteria are sustained and enhanced by phosphorus in the water. Excess phosphorus can, among many things, be the result of stormwater runoff and septic system loading. Stormwater runoff is increased by the amount of added impervious surface, as would be the case with a detached accessory dwelling unit. A 3-unit detached accessory dwelling unit would come close to doubling the septic system loading on a property. Think of how this would play out on the smaller lots. Detached accessory dwelling units on a lakefront property are dangerous to the health of a lake and should not be permitted. 2 members of the planning board stated at their December 13th meeting that the concern about accessory dwelling units is undue given the paucity of units developed over the past few years. The reason for changing, yes, loosening, the rules regarding accessory dwelling units is to make them more available for potential tenants. This makes the concern regarding these units very real. One member of the planning board also mentioned that attached accessory dwelling units are not a big deal because they are generally conversions to existing structures. The implication here is that the detached accessory dwelling units are a significant concern. Again, I reiterate, detached accessory dwelling units and the increased lake loading that comes with them is bad, not good for the health of our lakes, and they should not be permitted in the Shoreland Overlay District. If you do not want to significantly alter the rural character of New London, don't mess with lake quality. Thank you.
Thank you.
John, I think one thing to bring up, though, is that attached ADUs are already allowed. Adding detached is an or, so it's the same allowable. And on septic loading, especially around the lake, it's self-regulating. So if the lot can't support it, if somebody is proposing a detached ADU that's, adding bedrooms, let's say 2 bedrooms, and the lot can only support 4, and the main house has 4, it's done. You can't. It's self-regulating. So the same loading actually would apply if somebody tore that house down and built a house that had 6 bedrooms. So you're dividing the same number into whatever the lot. Let's say it's a 2.5 acre lot and it can support a 6-bedroom septic system. Whether it's 4 bedrooms in the house and 2 bedrooms in an ADU, it's still 6. It could be a 6-bedroom house, and I think we could all argue that typically the main house is where all the bedrooms go when we're talking about development around a lake. So when this comes to the advantage of being able for somebody to take an existing structure as opposed to building something new, that's where the advantage lies, if the lot can support it. Whether or not it's attached to the house or not really doesn't matter. Numerically, it comes out the same when it comes to septic loading.
Thanks, Jeremy.
I do agree on everything else about a lake and the water quality.
The only other thing, John, that I would add to that is that the percentage of the lot that is allowed to be occupied by impervious in the waterfront is already in the ordinance, whether that's impervious area that is dedicated to the single-family home or whether they're choosing to divide their allotted amount between accessory dwelling unit, attached or detached, and the single-family home. So the cumulative total of what you can get in the built environment is not actually any greater. It would simply mean that a property owner would have to have a smaller primary unit in order to accommodate impervious area being dedicated to a attached or detached ADU.
Thanks, Adam. Do you want to do the summary?
Sure. So if I could just sort of summarize
we're going to try to summarize where we are.
So we can make sure that, so the 2 changes that I have on here so far are to, under E1, to eliminate the proposed and / so that it would read 1 attached ADU or 1 detached ADU per single-family dwelling, period, and then with the elimination of the rest of that sentence, that is for shoreland overlay.
Yep, that's one.
Any other changes at this point? I think the question came up about the term of short-term rental days. Do you want to leave it at 90? Do you want to explore a different number?
Adam, are you striking
the
Excuse me, could you
part
just
about the shoreline?
clarify the shoreline provision there?
We're just striking that.
So previously, there was potential of 2 units allowed anywhere in town other than the shoreland overlay district, so it required an additional clarification just for the shoreland. What has been proposed is to walk that back to just one or the other anywhere in town, which is how the shoreland had been proposed. So it doesn't take further clarification. It would be you either, no matter where in town your property is, you either get an attached accessory dwelling unit or a detached accessory dwelling unit.
Including shoreline.
Everywhere.
Everywhere, correct.
Which is how the shoreland piece was written at the start of this evening. It's just now that the other parts of town will be written to match the shoreland.
One or the other.
Correct.
Yeah, please come forward.
It's regarding the septic systems. So if somebody puts in, oh, I'm Annie Ballin, by the way. If somebody puts in an accessory unit, whether it's 1 bedroom or, which I think 3 bedrooms is way too much, but especially given the examples of who the rentals are needed for, it's usually 1 or 2 people. But the septic systems are the thing that I'm concerned about, and is there regulation, like if they come to you and they say, I want to have an accessory dwelling and it's going to have 3 bedrooms, do they have to prove that their septic system will warrant the 6 bedrooms or
Correct,
that
and
potential?
it's not just a cumulative total of the number of bedrooms between the two. There's a base load requirement for a separate unit.
Okay.
So they have to hire a licensed designer to take their application through the state's process, and so they have to get a New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services approved individual sewage disposal system for, say, the 3-bedroom main house that exists, plus, and then it'll say 1-bedroom studio or 2-bedroom accessory or whatever they're actually proposing.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious, like somebody could say, I've done
Right,
it, but
and
I haven't increased my septic
The
system.
question sometimes comes up of, if I have a 4-bedroom house, can I just take one of those bedrooms and put in, and it's not an equivalent.
Okay.
A 1-bedroom ADU in a 3-bedroom house does not equal a 4-bedroom house. So
Okay.
that makes sense.
And then I go back to just I'm a little curious about the size of the increase from 2 to 3 bedrooms. I'm not sure that that's necessary. And then I do agree with Steve. We've done build-out studies before, and I think we need that information before we push these things forward. So I'd like to see that, and maybe it's out there and I just haven't seen it, and I apologize.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, can you briefly? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess I just wanted to propose, I just asked the question, in terms of like historical build-out and historical experience, my understanding at this, speaking of the ADU, is that this is now going, rather than by exception, going by right? Okay.
Nope.
So it's,
So currently, it's not by special exception. That's something entirely different. It's a conditional use permit, and that process would stay the same.
but the proposal is that it would now be by right?
No. That is not correct. That might have been mentioned as part of the potential House bill that is being proposed, and that is a legislative process. This does not change the process. They are uses allowed by conditional use permit, and so the process would stay the same.
So I guess I'm trying to understand what the difference is. So like, let's say
So if something's allowed by right, there's no planning board process.
All right. So like last year, if I wanted to build an accessory dwelling unit, I'd have to go to the town and get a permit.
You'd have to come to the planning board.
Come here.
Come to the planning board first, and then once you got your conditional use permit, then you can come and get a building permit. The town can't issue a building permit until you've come to the planning board. If it were allowed by right, you skip the planning board and you go directly to a building permit.
All right. So then, because what I was trying
And that is not being proposed.
what I was trying to understand, with these changes, would that have an impact on what has been the history of build-out? So we've had like a very small amount, like whatever the number was. Would we anticipate then with these new changes that in fact could be accelerated?
I mean, certainly it may appeal to some people who an attached has not appealed to in the past, though I would say that, not to say we've exhausted all of the people that an attached appeals to, but we've definitely seen a little bit of a slowdown, I think, and there's probably some initial pent-up demand for an attached accessory dwelling unit. So though I could see where we could have an initial spike in, maybe we have 4 applications for detached accessory dwelling units next year because somebody has been waiting to do that and they've been wanting to do that. That being said, it's not like the office door is being knocked down with people asking this question. In a year's time, I probably have to tell 4 to 6 people that they can't move forward with a detached project. Now, obviously, if all 6 of those people came to my office, maybe 20%, 30% actually move forward once they go through the design and the construction cost and all of that. I'm sure it weeds some out, but it's hard to say exactly how it would change projected growth rates, but I don't think we would see anything substantially larger.
I guess to the point, that does seem like there's a lot of interest in that type of projection across the board with all the changes that are being proposed for the zoning amendment. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I think we need to.
Just very quickly.
Yeah.
So if we're using past history on this, why are we making any changes?
Because we still need more housing.
I understand. So you're trying to improve on the 2 per year.
So
when we use that as a fallback on our discussion, that's not the way we're looking to have things go as we move forward. We're hoping to see that number increase. Correct. So the history that we're falling back on is irrelevant.
Well, it's also the idea that, to Adam's point, that we might have run through some of the demand for attached ADUs. So if we have more options for detached, we may see a few more, but the idea is we are trying to add diversity of housing, but we're not trying to. Look, we all live here too. We want the town to be a nice place as well, and we've worked hard on this with the Housing Commission, and we're trying to find ways to modestly increase housing in town, but also, again, add to diversity and do what we can to get a few more ADUs in where attached may not be feasible for some reason. Okay, so I think Adam went through the proposed changes. Is there, from the board, is there a sense of where we stand? Do we have someone want to make a motion?
Skipping further discussion, I would make a motion to move forward the changes to, or the proposal to, amendment number 4, accessory dwelling units, with the change in E1 as Adam stated prior.
Correct. And the other.
To elimination of and,
yeah, sorry.
To or.
Sorry.
With the elimination of the rest of that sentence.
Right. So we have a motion on the floor to move to the next public hearing. Obviously, that's a substantive change. Is there a second? Second. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you.
All right, 2 more to go, guys. Stick with me. So and if anybody wants to head out, feel free to do that. So the next one is something that we don't really get a lot of control over, so it should be an easier process. This is in relation to the National Flood Insurance Program and the floodplain regulations. In order for New London residents whose properties fall within the floodplain to qualify for flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program, we are required to stay compliant with their regulations. And so every few years, the state Office of Planning does a review of the floodplain regulations and then tells us what we need to do to change to stay in compliance so that our neighbors whose homes are in the floodplain continue to have access to flood insurance. And so that is what has been proposed here. There's nothing particularly major as part of the FEMA's process to remap the floodplains. They are working on the Kentucook watershed, and as part of that process, which part of our town falls into the Kentucook watershed, basically the Pleasant Lake watershed portion of town, they have completed their review and proposed this. To be honest, we don't have the option to not move forward with this if we want folks to continue to be able to get flood insurance who are in a floodplain, which is a requirement for them to mortgage their properties.
Thanks, Adam, for that summary. Is there any questions on this one from the board? This is more of a straightforward one, I think. Questions or comments from the public on this one? Okay. Yep. Is there a motion to move this to the warrant, rather?
I make a motion to move this to the warrant.
Is there a second? Thanks, Marianne. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
Okay. The last zoning amendment is one that was not proposed by the planning board or the select board. So there's 3 ways to propose a zoning amendment in New Hampshire. The planning board can propose it, the select board can propose it, or a petition of 25 registered voters can propose it. So when you get a petitioned zoning amendment, it no matter what, ends up on the ballot on voting day in the state in which it is delivered to the town clerk's office. This board does not have the ability to amend it, nor does a petitioner if they so chose. And so this board's job now is to decide whether they support a petition zoning amendment or not. And by law, a note goes on the ballot saying that either yes, this has support of the planning board, or no, this does not have the support of the zoning planning board. So this looks a little bit different than a traditional planning board proposed one. So this zoning amendment is proposed to, and so also as part of this, when you get a petition zoning amendment, the board has to establish their understanding of the proposal so that it's clear what they're voting on. And so I will sort of put into words the understanding, and then I'm looking to you guys to alter that understanding if you think differently, but it's a starting point. So the petition amendment proposes to amend the definition of lodging house within the Article 3 definition section of the New London zoning ordinance to include short-term rentals within the definition of lodging house. Additionally, the proposal includes requiring lodging houses, parenthesis, including short-term rentals, to obtain a conditional use permit from the planning board. Lodging houses would be required to be inspected for compliance with state building code and RSA 153:10-a, parentheses, automatic fire warning devices and carbon monoxide detection devices in dwellings on an annual basis. The process of the conditional use permit is proposed to be included within the Article 3 definitions section. So I guess take a pause, make sure that those of you who have reviewed board-wise, that's the understanding?
That's fair for me.
Okay. And then, so just a note, as mentioned before zoning amendments come to the public hearing, we always sit down with town council and go through each one that we have lined up and proposed. And with this one in particular, the town attorney reviewed it, and the proposed amendment is written in a manner that he advises is legally deficient because it does not include criteria for a conditional use permit. So what that means, conditional use permits are an innovative land use control as defined by the state law. And so under conditional use permits, the zoning ordinance can clearly define some latitude that a planning board gets that is not existent in other parts of the ordinance where a conditional use permit is not required. So accessory dwelling unit is a good example of one conditional use permit that we have where there's criteria like your door has to face the side or rear of the property, your different pieces like that that we walk through, and without this having criteria, the our town council said that the planning board would not have a basis for which to base its approval or disapproval of a lodging house. So,
Could I ask for some clarification, Tim?
Yeah, please.
Are you saying we essentially don't have the jurisdiction, the legal jurisdiction, given the inadequacy of the citation conditional use permit, the usage of that in this?
So
we don't have the authority because this is a different usage.
So, but right now we're not necessarily looking for authority. It's the decision whether or not to put it on the ballot. If it were to pass and be in place in the zoning ordinance, if someone brought a conditional use permit application for a lodging house to the planning board, town council said you would not have criteria to base your decision, and therefore you likely would not be able to make a decision, which he then questioned the enforceability of being able to carry out the objective here, which is the objective is life safety, to make sure, or I believe, I don't want to necessarily speak, but my interpretation is the objective is the life safety aspect of providing alarm and notification to occupants of short-term rentals and lodging house establishments.
So you're saying the idea of authority doesn't come into play here because this has not been approved by the townspeople, but if it were approved, then it would be inadequate for us to use in reviewing criteria for the conditional use permit.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so is there any public comments or questions on this? Please, sir, come forward.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ralph Tingley, 245 Shaker Street. I've been an 8-year resident of the town, been associated with the fire department since I got here. And prior to that, I spent 47 years in the fire service in Connecticut, the last 20 years as a career firefighter, specifically the fire marshal, and dealt with codes and standards throughout that time. And again, as I think is already mentioned, we're trying to just make sure that people are safe. That's all we're trying to do here. We're not trying to stop short-term rentals or anything like that. That's way outside of our realm. It's basically to keep folks safe. The idea of the conditional permit, use permit, I think you wouldn't be granting that permit without the inspection first being conducted to show that there is or there isn't a life safety issue in the apartment. So I'm not really, or in the unit. So I'm not sure where, it's kind of like the cart before the horse on that. You guys wouldn't be granting that conditional permit prior to the fire department inspecting the facility. So I'm not really too sure as to why that would be an issue. Again, I'm not an attorney, but I've dealt with these things for a long, long time. The other thing I just wanted to say is that, we're trying to make sure that we are aware that these buildings are out there, and that, because this could change tactics that the fire department has to use. We want to know whether we can expect a two-family home, a one-family home, or whether we're going to have 15 or 20 people unfamiliar with that facility that are there under maybe not great conditions, if they're out partying or whatever. And I don't know about anybody here, but I've been in places overnight that I'm not familiar with, and sometimes you wake and you're a little bit confused, and it's not because of my age, it's because you're just not familiar with it. So that's why we're trying to just make sure that people are safe in the environment that they're going to be into. That's basically it. So if, Chief Lyon may want to add something to that because of the tactics that he has to employ on this whole situation also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to my understanding from my discussion with town council is really just the formatting of how the conditional use permit process has to be prescribed in the ordinance. And so I completely understand and agree with what you're saying about the fire department would opine to the planning board. And then I think it's just a matter of having the specificity of how that process happened be within this amendment, so that it was as black and white as saying that prior to applying for a conditional use permit, an applicant would seek out an approval from the fire department and a recommendation from the fire inspector be given to the planning board, whatever the language would happen to be. And I think it's just really more a level of design more than anything. And I think he was also open. I shared with him an idea that Jay and I have talked about how to potentially accomplish this goal outside of the zoning ordinance, but in a process that doesn't require zoning amendment. And town council also shared that he'd be willing to sit down and have a discussion about how that could be feasible too.
Yep. Tom Elliott, 46 Mountain Road. I oppose the proposed amendment. I don't vote in New London, so I won't actually be able to oppose at the ballot booth, but I don't oppose the goal. And I live in Durham full-time, where we have a very well thought out life safety rental code that is not a land use control per se, but it does stringently protect, I think, landlords and tenants, predominantly students, but any tenant, short-term, long-term. I just think there are other ways to achieve this goal under New Hampshire state law that doesn't mix it in with this land use control. I'm fairly well read about these issues, and I read this amendment was totally befuddled by both the goal and actually the applicability and enforceability of it. I'm not surprised to hear that the attorney would call it deficient. It just needs to be thought through. So maybe we should encourage the select board to make a committee or however volunteers could be organized to really think through the life safety issues and how to best force registration and thus compliance with life safety code. As an owner of sometimes a short-term rental, I would welcome having the fire department declare my property safe for short-term rentals or safe in general. Last note, I will say though that my insurance to be a short-term rental owner is quite stringent, and actually had to send a lot of pictures and had to prove at a remarkably high level the safety of our property. I don't think all the short-term rental owners in town are probably getting the level of insurance I did. And so I still think we should have an underlying regulatory approach to this. I agree. But there are other ways to impact and control the way people manage these properties that maybe it's not as dire an issue because if you're being thoughtful about this, you do have to think about your insurance issues as well. But in general, I think it's a great idea to have a short-term rental life safety approach. I just don't think this is it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay, did you want to say something? Sorry, Chief Lyon.
Jay Lyon, Fire Chief. And I wish that some of the audience was still here, because I think that this proposed article or petition article would address some of the safety concerns. Adam and I have been talking about this for 3 years. We're hoping the legislators down in Concord would move something forth that would make sense in communities like ours. The concern that we have is not remotely or exclusively New London. It's all the communities throughout the state, and the fire chiefs have all said the same thing from a legislative perspective. We've hoped something has been pushed down from the state level. The tough thing is there's differing issues. Certainly Durham is slightly different from the rental properties, and lodging and rooming is a different animal than what we're looking at from a short-term rental perspective. The off-campus housing from a college perspective like Durham has been almost mitigated because of the size of Colby Sawyer and their incentives to have students living on campus, which has been fantastic from us because that's a huge concern when you look at off-campus housing and fire fatalities. We go to a lot of calls. I shouldn't say a lot. We go to calls in short-term rentals that are concerning. For instance, my dad's old house on Knights Hill right behind the Lordson residence. Single-family residence. This has now been turned into a short-term rental. The third floor that used to be our attic is now a sleeping room for 6 bunk beds. No smoke detectors, no secondary means of egress. Those are the issues. We were just at a call a couple weeks ago where a short-term rental, they're taking stove ashes out and filling up 3 or 4 buckets of ashes, keeping them in the garage space right next to the firewood. These are the issues that are concerning and that we can help mitigate. The 2 things that we're focused on is alarm and notification. If there's an issue inside the building, how are the occupants going to know about it? And if there is an issue, how are they going to get out in a safe and timely manner? So means of egress and notification. So it's not a sprinkling situation. It's not an enforcement situation that we have in other communities that are dealing with things. And if the select board so chose, it would make sense to look at the life safety issues through the fire department. So we're certainly willing, and I know that the planning board every year has a whole stack of things that they're trying to go through and address, and we're sensitive to that. It's just a matter of trying to sort of drop the leaflets and hopefully something comes to fruition in order to make these places safer, because there's huge concerns. As the former marshal said, this was initiated by people responding to various calls and being horrified with some of the conditions that we're finding. From a tactics and strategy, and not to harp on my family's old house, but we're not going to a single or multi-family dwelling. We're going to a dormitory fire. We have a separate run card specifically for Colby Sawyer, for Bittersweet, for Lionbrook, for the New London Hospital, for Fenwood Commons, with additional apparatus, additional personnel. The beneficial thing is those are all sprinklered buildings. These are single-family dwellings that are being used as businesses that have very little protection, if any, and certainly concerning. And certainly the former marshal, William Degnan, was hoping to be, he was available on Tuesday. Unfortunately, the snowstorm got us, or a weather event. But he's certainly in favor, and moving forth, we're open to any suggestions that the planning board has, the interaction with the select board and looking at things to make it as safe as possible for the people that are coming to New London, but also then protecting property owners that own these structures that potentially opening themselves up to liability.
Thanks, Jay. Go ahead, Janet.
I think we're all in favor of life safety issues, and I would say to Tom that we rely on the fire department to tell us when we need to do something differently. We don't need a committee. We've got a great group of people working for the fire department. With regard to this particular warrant article, though, the selectmen have not had an opportunity to talk about it or review it, and I do know that there is some question about how you would implement it legally. So I think how it was worded is problematic. And if you can find another avenue to do what you want to do, which we support, we're all in favor of that.
I think it goes through the state building code, and the problem with not the problem, I guess it would be a deficiency, is that we don't have building inspector.
Right.
So many of the issues that we would have day in and day out would be covered when they're doing their inspections. We don't have that ability. So that does add some complexity. I think the guidance is there. The square footage for windows is there. The problem is no one's looking at it. So when you look at new structures that are being constructed, many of them are not being built to code. The state fire marshal, when he moved into town, he looked at almost a dozen structures. None of them met minimum code compliance when it came to smoke detectors. And those are, anytime there's a fire fatality in the state of New Hampshire, there's either no smoke detectors or the smoke detectors aren't working. So, you know, he built a house, sprinklered the house, obviously meets code compliance, but it's just one of those things that we want to, and we are very grateful for the support of the board and the select board to take care of us, and certainly from legal advice. I think moving forward, if this doesn't get passed, we can look at things from a different avenue, and certainly our apology from the Ralph Tingley's perspective. It was something where there was a time frame that was short. We're hoping that for the last 3 years something would come to fruition. We understand the board's super busy. It was just a matter of trying to get something in, and hopefully moving forward looking at that and having it vetted by legal and going from there. So thank you for your time, especially past our bedtimes.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I think just one thing, I agree with Janet on this, and to Adam's point, I think what it's missing is, if you look at any other conditional use permit, there's a portion of the text that says a conditional use permit application shall contain the following, and A, B, C, D, E, F. And this doesn't have any of that. So I think, that's where town council is saying, great idea, and I think everybody on this board supports safety. It's just that this isn't necessarily going to get it. It's going to put it in front of us, and we're not going to be able to do anything with it because there really actually isn't a procedure sitting here.
Yep. Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah.
Procedurally, what do we do at this point? Because it doesn't sound like we're going to endorse this. Do we ask the people who submitted it whether they want to withdraw it, or
No,
it's ahead?
And it goes on the warrant no matter what.
And we're going to say we don't endorse it.
That's up to one of you to make a motion.
That would be my recommendation based on town council. Not that we don't all support, to Janet's point, life safety, of course. It's just more that, it's just that we just need to get the particulars right.
I'll do that.
Can I just ask one more question?
Sure. Yeah.
If we don't endorse it, do we say why? I
It
can't
doesn't,
remember.
no.
We just say we don't endorse it.
It just says, just the statement yes or no, right?
Statement yes or no, on the ballot. I believe, Marianne, that there's two parts in the town report. One that's a copy of the ballot, and then one that shows you the rationale. And we put in the rationale for our proposed. I believe the rationale, I think the rationale goes in as the petitioner's rationale, not the planning board's rationale. But I'll have to look it up. Honestly, we do petition so infrequently that it's been a while.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion that we do not endorse this, and if it's possible, we add a rationale or substantiate why, and we say something like we endorse the life safety aspects of it, but procedurally it's
legally
insufficient
deficient.
and legally not binding, so we're not going to endorse it.
Do you want to?
Yeah. Do you want me to take a swipe at that?
I thought I did.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Team effort.
No, the defining part, the endorsement part. Or the not endorsement part. I think, to clarify, the board does support the intent of the petition and the fire safety, and just want to reiterate that and be very clear about that. But we cannot support the petition article due to the fact that it is missing the criteria of a conditional use permit, and how the board would proceed with that application.
So, yeah, perfect. Okay. Thank you, guys. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed, abstaining? Okay. Thanks. So if we're able to do that, we will do that, but otherwise we'll have that language. Okay.
All right, so we still have 3 more applications to get through, so if your interest is done, we just ask you, move out quick so we can keep moving on.
And thank you all for coming,
Poor
for
guys
those who are leaving now,
here all night.
and our apologies to the tree cutting applications. I'm sorry.
So
It's been all- yeah.
this is what happened when everyone that shows up to the meeting signs on to the Wi-Fi, and it crashes our ability until most people have left. As soon as everybody leaves, the Wi-Fi comes back up. I didn't know enough at that point, but then as I'm watching people leave, then it goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So,
Okay, well,
we now
thanks.
have your pictures at least, guys.
Yes. Thank you again. We're going to try to move on here. I know it's late. I apologize again for the tree cutting applications who had to sit through a long night. So we will start with the Ferrante property at 53 Lighthouse View Road. If you just come on up and introduce yourself for the record. Appreciate it. Thank you for waiting.
I'm Josh Bartlett, sales arborist for Chippers.
Okay, and do you want to just talk a little bit about, it should,
So I went out and visited the property with Josh, and this is actually quite an old house, late 1800s, I believe, and it sits very close to the water's edge, and there is a tree that, if I can pull up my pictures. There's a few trees to come down, but there's one that is leaning very close to the house, which it's this one, right, Josh?
It's also the largest. It's 35 inches in diameter.
And so obviously you can see the corner of the house and the pretty steep lean towards the house there, and there's some other issues that I'm sure Josh could give you more details on. But it needs to come out, which leaves it deficient by, I think it was 3 points?
Yep.
And so their landscape architect has proposed a replanting that includes a viburnum, native tree here, and then these are native blueberry bushes. This is just the Latin name for the blueberry bush. Don't be thrown off. And then I can't remember the common name for these shrubs. But it was off the DES native species list.
Yep, they're, hang on. There are a variety of Itea, which are kind of very similar to like a rhododendron. They're kind of a stemmy low bush, white flowers.
So for the 3 points they need, they will be replanting 7 points.
great. Thank you, Josh, for that explanation, and Adam as well. Are there questions or comments from the public on this?
Looks nice.
Did I hear someone? I'm sorry. Okay, great. Is there any other questions? A motion to approve? No, I asked the public. I did, yeah. No comments from the public, yeah.
I would make the motion to approve the tree cutting application as presented for the Ferrante property.
Okay, thanks, Ty, on that one. Appreciate it. All in favor? Aye.
And we owe Josh and Tom lunch.
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry that for all that you had to sit through for a very quick thing.
Thank you.
Apologies again. Hopefully you're getting paid by the hour. Next up is a tree cutting application for Wendy Miller at 253 Forest Acres Road. Hey, Tom, thanks for waiting.
Thank you.
So Tom and I have also done a site visit here. Let me get back to the pictures. Feel free to jump in, Tom. You might be faster than me pulling up the pictures.
At the Miller residence, we're going to be removing a dead ash tree that's been damaged by ash borer. Another tree that is a white pine with significant root rot, a hole partway up from woodpecker damaged. There's ant evidence of tree rot and frass. And then another pine tree to the left of that, that will be removed due to multiple stems and root rot again. So the only issue I think that me and Adam saw was that specific cell only has that one tree, and there's a patio a stone paver patio. So we're trying to find room along the shoreline, but maybe we might need some plantings on either cell, neighboring cell like we've done in the past. But if Adam goes back up to that map, it would be right there, cell number 3. So it's the only tree. There's blueberry bushes at the base and along the water frontage, but
Essentially, this is all granite in here.
yes, correct.
Which obviously is not a great planting material.
Yeah. So I mean, there's some room to make it on. I think it's the cell to the right, and then there's some room on the left as well. But trying to get creative with this one. Maybe where I guess we're proposing, 5 points in that one, and maybe split 2 and 3 on either side. That way, we're still getting the cell count and getting rid of the hazardous tree. So.
As you said, Tom, that's the kind of thing we've done in the past where you're in a tight spot like this. Are there questions from the board on this one? And I don't imagine, but are there questions from the public on this one?
It does not involve an ADU.
Right. So it's an easy.
I think we should be good. Right.
Exactly. Everyone's getting punchy. All right. So then the potential, if there would be one from the planning board, would be to, as Tom outlined, maybe allow for, we said 5 points in the cell and maybe split it, the remaining 5 points among the 2 adjoining cells?
Yeah, I think that's a.
What's that?
Is it a 10-point tree? I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 36 inches.
Tom, would it be reasonable to say that the 5 points split between the other 2 be in the halves of those cells closest to this cell? So the 12.5 feet
Right.
from center to here?
Yep. Yeah,
That's
I think that's if I remember correctly, I think we'd be fine
That's
with
feasible?
that. Yeah.
That's a good, because it obviously gets closer to the intention of the filling the cell. So potentially, did you want to make a motion with that? You look ready.
Yeah.
Hand on the finger. All right, finger on the button.
I would move to approve the application for the Miller property with the replacement 10 points, 5 occurring in the cell of the 10-point tree, the remaining 5 split within 12.5 feet to either side, either adjacent cell, either side of the adjacent cells.
What, you guys, I love this. You guys are in tandem. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And moving right along, for the Quackenbos Trust at 157 Poor Road.
Correct.
Here we are.
So this is also Tom.
Tom Conway, nice to meet you guys.
I did a site visit with Pam. You were
Correct, I
there
was
that day,
not
right?
there,
Okay. So there's a variety of trees that Pam walked me throughout the property to look at that they would like to thin out. The vast majority are in cells that have more than 25 points or will have more than 25 points upon completion of the cutting. The area of concern is it that one? It's this one right here, right, Tom?
Yeah. Maybe even to the left a little bit. It's right along the water near her dock. Right.
So right here?
Yeah.
Right, because it's just above. Let me zoom in more. So taking this tree right here above this cell, drops it below to 24, I think it was total.
Yeah.
My computer's tired too.
So we need 15, right? Quadrant G.
G. Yes.
So, or do we only need 10 because we just need to get back?
Right. You have to maintain what it had.
Right.
And so they have proposed 10 points of native species from the DES list, split evenly, 5 points of tree and 5 of shrub. When I spoke with Pam, she wasn't sure what size nursery stock they could get, so she didn't want to necessarily specify 5 points in one tree, because if they cannot get a tree with a large enough caliper at 4.5 feet, then they may have to plant multiple, which truthfully for the lake in the long run is the better choice. But so that's what she asked, was that if we could just put it on a point basis, not a particular stem basis.
Correct.
Is there any discussion from the board on this one? Further discussion? Any comment from the public? Any questions or comments? I heard Janet in the peanut gallery.
I just want you to know the selectmen's meetings go a lot faster.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Perhaps
you
that
got
way
the
your
short
minutes-
straw. You got the short straw tonight with Bill being out of town. So, all right. No comments from the public. Is there a motion from the board?
I would make a motion to approve the tree cutting for the Quackenbos property with a 5-point tree split without specifying how many trees, and 5-point and shrubbery, as long as they are from the approved DES species list.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Very sorry about that.
So we would meet next on the 23rd to have the final public hearing. And to tell you the truth, I cannot remember if there's anything else on the agenda, so I'm not going to try.
It's fair. All we need now, we will be back. We just need a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
All in